The cast of characters throughout Onimusha are many, not even counting the different species of minor Genma we see over time. While there is a significant number of major characters like Samanosuke, Jubei, Guildenstern or Nobunaga, there are quite a few minor characters that seem to disappear after a short time with very little explanation, or simply appear for an even shorter time before never being seen again, such as Yuki, Kotaro, or even Juju and Ginfa in the manga. These always feel like a missed opportunity to some degree, but the biggest example, at least for me, is Keijiro Maeda, formerly known as Yumemaru. After being saved by Samanosuke and Kaede in Warlords, he left Japan with Yuki to sail abroad in a similar fashion to Samanosuke in 1556, only to return years later as the warrior we know as Keijiro sometime before Blade Warriors. Once Samanosuke and Kaede began working against Nobunaga, Keijiro managed to meet Kaede, and upon discovering that Samanosuke is also still alive, promises to fight on their behalf in order to repay their actions 13 years prior. By this point, he has become a powerful warrior in his own right, becoming proficient with a Nagamaki and taking full advantage of his impressive physical strength. Even without any Oni power, he has proven to be entirely capable of fighting back against the Genma, so it feels a little odd that after reuniting with Samanosuke and Kaede, he just kind of vanishes never to be seen again despite his promise to aid them. So how would things have changed had he actually stuck around? If Keijiro had actually remained with the two as promised, what impact would he have had on the story going forward? Once Keijiro reunites with Samanosuke and Kaede, revealing to them his previous identity of Yumemaru, he remains at their side for more or less the entirety of Blade Warriors, though he does not join Samanosuke and Jubei against Nobunaga since he recognises that the Genma Lord is likely way out of his league. So he instead sticks with the likes of Kaede, Oyu, Eke and Kotaro to thin the Genma's numbers, while the two Oni defeat Nobunaga. After the Genma Lord is beaten and the Oni go their separate ways, he is soon resurrected by Guildenstern once again and resumes his conquest. While Keijiro is officially a member of the Maeda clan, he instantly takes issue with their alliance with Nobunaga and distances himself from them. From here on, he wanders the land on his own terms, his loyalty now solely with Samanosuke and Kaede for his rescue over a decade prior. This loyalty soon extends to the Oni clan, and he begins fighting for them more than the Maeda clan, if only because Samanosuke and Kaede already trust them, and finds himself fighting alongside them against the Genma more and more. This leads him to be present during the dreaded first battle against Garganto, leading to a 3v1 against the Genma warrior. While he and Kaede are still only human and far beneath Garganto's ability, Keijiro's raw strength catches Garganto off guard a little bit, surprised that a mere human could be this strong. Garganto easily ups his game and overpowers Keijiro, but Samanosuke is able to intervene and prevent Keijiro's death, and Garganto is forced to flee as fighting all three of them may be too much for him, resulting in Kaede actually surviving her encounter and reaching the events of Demon Siege alongside Samanosuke and Keijiro. Following this valiant stand against the Genma's mightiest warrior, the Oni take notice of both Kaede and Keijiro's efforts and deem them worthy of their power, making them both Oni warriors. While Kaede already possesses the Oni's sacred knife, Keijiro is also gifted his own Oni weapon, a wind-based Guandao known as Hariken. This new power, alongside his already impressive strength, turns him into an extremely dangerous Oni warrior, and he soon gains a feared reputation throughout the Genma similar to the late Murakoto. What's more is that his position alongside Samanosuke and Kaede effectively makes them as a group nigh unstoppable, with each warrior's abilities complementing each other. Keijiro acts as the powerhouse of the group, complemented by Kaede's speed and agility when faced with faster enemies, and Samanosuke acts as the perfect middle ground to be able to fill whatever role is needed. When Samanosuke and Kaede learn of Mitsuhide's rebellion against Nobunaga, Keijiro agrees to provide his own aid, though only on the condition that he is not officially affiliated with him, since he prefers to live life through his own decisions rather than being tied to the whims of a clan. Mitsuhide sees no reason to deny this term, since any aid is valuable against Nobunaga at this point. He and Kaede join Samanosuke in assaulting the Genma tank in 1582, and while they are initially able to sneak on board, Samanosuke and Kaede remain hidden while Keijiro immediately emerges to draw attention, knowing that he is more suited for brute strength rather than stealth. Despite fighting alone against the now alerted Genma, Keijiro's skill and strength leads him to tear through most of the Genma, while Samanosuke and Kaede reveal themselves to catch out the faster stragglers that attempt to outmaneuver him. By this point, some Genma begin to lose their nerve upon seeing Keijiro, with one or two even attempting to flee at the sight of him, having now become completely terrified of his notorious strength. With all three Oni now pushing through the tank, there's no need for them to simply escape the Genma reinforcements, instead working together to just fight through them, leading to them simply breaking into the control room through the door rather than from the roof. As the two large Genma drop down to defend the tank, the Oni decide to split their attention, with Samanosuke and Kaede teaming up against one while Keijiro is left to bring down the other. The teamwork of Samanosuke and Kaede quickly leads to the first guard's defeat, while Keijiro's strength ends up flat out overpowering his own opponent, defeating the other guard before the other two Oni are able to help him. Remember that Keijiro's strength was already exceptional as a human. Now that he's a fully fledged Oni, he has become even more dangerous, so overpowering this single Genma guard is not above the realm of possibilities. As the guards are defeated, Garganto emerges from his pod, and remembering his previous encounter with him, as well as his new reputation, instead challenges Keijiro to a 1v1 instead of Samanosuke. This is also done since a 3v1 situation here would absolutely be a losing battle, so he wants to try and bring down at least one Oni. Keijiro accepts this challenge and tells the other two to stand back, leaving the two to begin their duel. While his strength is enough not to be pushed back quite as much as Samanosuke is in canon, Garganto still proves to be a difficult opponent to overcome. While this fight rages on, Samanosuke and Kaede are not just sitting idly by, taking advantage of the two fighters' occupied attention to sneak by on the outskirts of the room and reach Garganto's pod. Kaede leaps atop the pod, Garganto finally noticing what they're doing, but with Keijiro still relentless in his battle against the Genma warrior, Garganto is unable to do anything to stop Kaede as she cuts the tube holding the pod and sending it plummeting into the Genma tank's brain. As it explodes, Samanosuke and Kaede call for them to escape, and Keijiro runs after them as they leap from the structure, both Samanosuke and Keijiro using wind magic to soften the fall for the three of them. The three survive the resulting explosion and reawaken to find Garganto still standing, and Keijiro steps forward, ready to finish their fight. The other two stand back as he begins absorbing the nearby Genma souls and transforming into his Oni form, much like Samanosuke in canon. This, combined with his already noteworthy strength, leads him to immediately disarm Garganto and drive his Nagamaki through the Genma's torso. At this point, Garganto knows that he is entirely outmatched, but with a smile, warns that they still will not be enough to destroy Nobunaga, laughing as Keijiro removes his weapon and the Genma's body explodes. Keijiro's large frame serves as a shield for the other two Oni, and all three survive to report to Mitsuhide, who is delighted to hear of their success, offering 3 new sets of armour for them. While Samanosuke gains his usual chainmail, Kaede gets a slightly more reinforced set of shinobi armour to grant a nice mix of protection and manoeuvrability. However, when offered his own set of new armour, Keijiro politely refuses, preferring to stick with the outfit he has. Knowing his preference to remain independent, Mitsuhide doesn't argue since Keijiro's aid against Nobunaga is what's important here, and the assault on Honnoji begins. With the 3 Onis aiding in this attack, it's easy to imagine just how effortless the advance to the temple truly is, and the Oni reach and confront the Genma Lord. Noticing that they're outnumbered, Ranmaru actually wants to fight alongside Nobunaga rather than simply defend the Lord, but Keijiro, also having experienced the Genma's horrors at Ranmaru's age, expresses disappointment at seeing him willingly and foolishly selling his soul to them. This only angers Ranmaru, who changes his mind and challenges Keijiro alone, determined to fight for the Oda clan's honour. Keijiro sighs in exasperation but accepts after warning him just how bad of an idea this is. Ranmaru remains steadfast and lunges at Keijiro, hoping to take advantage of Keijiro's emphasis on strength by trying to outspeed him. By now, however, Keijiro is more than enough of a seasoned warrior to be able to respond to this tactic and easily blocks and parries Ranmaru's attacks. This significantly shakes Ranmaru's confidence, causing him to falter and give Keijiro a chance to retaliate, cutting Ranmaru down in a single strike. With Nobunaga now standing alone against 3 Oni, he immediately launches his assault against them, believing that he is still too much for them. He quickly learns, however, that their coordination makes them almost unstoppable, and they are able to keep up enough pressure that even with his unnatural speed, he loses the initiative and is forced into the defensive. As he gets a bit of distance following the initial scuffle, a timefold appears and sends both the Oni and Ranmaru's corpse to the future. As usual, the Oni awake in an alley and find that their Oni power has been drained and their weapons lost. This leads to them saving Jacques and Philippe from the Zorm and watching as the two are dragged by another timefold into the past. Kaede finds and picks up the phone, but before they can discuss it or even any recent events, Samanosuke and Kaede notice Keijiro looking up with a clear, hateful look in his eyes, following his gaze to notice Guildenstern atop the Arc de Triomphe. Knowing the hatred for the scientist that he has built up since the events 22 years prior, the two are left to calm him down before proceeding toward it, finding the light orb and granting Tenso to Samanosuke, and nobody else. Now, in a similar fashion to my what if Samanosuke failed to control his Oni power scenario, the number of Oni here makes things a bit awkward here. The way I made that scenario work is by having Jubei gain the power of the orb through the mark on his hand, similar to the dragon shrines in Samurai's Destiny, and then giving the orb to Kaede to slot it into her gauntlet. However, this isn't a luxury we can take this time. On top of nobody having the same innate Oni power that Jubei has, we have 3 Onis at once here, each wearing their own Oni gauntlet, so sharing an orb is simply not possible here. The silver lining here is that we have the same number of Oni as there are orbs throughout Demon Siege, so I decided to split them evenly between them. As a result, Samanosuke is the one to gain a new weapon here, with Kaede and Keijiro gaining their own weapons from the orbs obtained later in the game. As they emerge from beneath the orb chamber, they are confronted by Michelle and her men, and while Keijiro attempts to let cooler heads prevail, the language barrier combined with his large size only intimidates her and her men, and they get a bit more aggressive, forcing him to back down to try and ease their concerns. While they watch the rest of their squad enter the Ark, Michelle does not have her men follow them, not feeling too confident handling all 3 Oni on her own. Of course, they all hear the deaths within the Ark and follow, with the Oni close behind. As the Zagat begin their attack, Michelle's men are picked off one by one, but before they can turn on her, the Oni are able to arrive and defeat them in time, saving Michelle before she loses consciousness. She thanks them for their aid, which is apparent to them even with the language barrier, and Keijiro mimes out his actions, telling her to stay here while they head upstairs. Understanding him, Michelle gives him the key to the upper floor door, and the Oni ascend while she begins the process of moving her men's bodies to hopefully bury them once this is all over. The group confront Guildenstern, who expresses a fair bit of concern now that 3 Oni are here to impede him, though while Keijiro is once again angered by his presence, Guildenstern does not yet comment on it since he doesn't actually recognise him yet. I know you could argue that he should, given that he recognised Samanosuke after the same amount of time, but Samanosuke was always an adult, whereas Keijiro was only a child during Warlords, so the change is a lot more drastic. Despite the increased odds of interference, he remains confident in the timefolds and summons Brainstorm to defeat them. Of course, the Oni would make short work of his new creation and begin to ponder their next move. Jacques' Mount Hiei section remains rather similar, though when first encountering Samanosuke, he finds the Oni already fighting Genma off when he arrives, with Kaede being the one to drop from the roof after taking out a Genma archer. Having already seen both of them in the future, he reacts with similar hostility, but Akko soon mediates the situation and Jacques explains what he knows to them. While Samanosuke is a little skeptical, Kaede is quicker to believe him given that he is an Oni now, openly suspecting Guildenstern as the one responsible. Knowing how often he attempts to subvert nature through Genma science, Samanosuke thinks that explanation makes sense and they all agree to an alliance. Samanosuke suggests meeting another Oni ally as their first step, with Jacques mentioning that he may know who he's talking about already. They soon reach the Enja monument to find Keijiro, who gets the rundown, and while he remains cordial, yet a little distant, he trusts Samanosuke's and Kaede's judgment to work with Jacques. They soon split up to find clues, with Samanosuke going ahead, Kaede heading back down the mountain, and Keijiro sticking with Jacques as they check the mountainside. While Jacques traverses the Oni fireflies, Keijiro grabs the attention of any nearby Genma to keep them off Jacques as he searches. After finding the bronze mirror, he rejoins Keijiro and witnesses his strength as he overpowers the Genma around him, silently impressed and a little intimidated at his ability. Once they retrieve the Oni ring and Jacques gains Enja, they return to meet with Kaede to find a large key and reunite with Samanosuke to open the gate and reach Enryaku Temple. The group are confronted by Ranmaru Mori, who upon introducing himself and noticing Jacques, becomes angry when Keijiro expresses similar disappointment at someone so young willingly serving the Genma. Ranmaru, perhaps sensing an opportunity to create discord within the group, flips the conversation and chastises Keijiro for betraying his own clan by opposing Nobunaga, something that momentarily concerns Jacques, but Keijiro is unfazed, simply saying that he cares little for serving the Maeda clan, especially now that they've started bowing to the whims of the Oda clan. Annoyed at his resilience, Ranmaru summons Marcellus and leaves them to fight, though both Samanosuke and Kaede give chase while Jacques and Keijiro face Marcellus. As to be expected, Keijiro ends up doing the majority of the heavy lifting during this fight, though Jacques does manage to find a rhythm of his own thanks to Keijiro's support. Their teamwork leads to a faster defeat of Marcellus, though Jacques is still rather tired after the fact. Akko offers to head to the future to reassure Henri of Jacques' survival, and Keijiro sits with him while they take a rest. Jacques can't help but ask Keijiro what Ranmaru meant about betraying Nobunaga, but Keijiro immediately tells him that he never served the Warlord to begin with. He explains that the Maeda clan pledged to serve the Oda clan years ago, so he decided to distance himself from them so as to not affiliate with the Genma. He recounts the events at Inabayama Castle 22 years prior, and explains that his loyalties lie with Samanosuke and Kaede in order to repay them for saving his life as well as his sister Yuki. Seeing how genuine Keijiro's words are, Jacques drops the topic, realising that Ranmaru was only trying to start some infighting. In the future, the Oni return to Michelle as she finishes paying respects to her fallen men, and while she wants to know what happened, remembers the language barrier preventing effective communication. Akko appears as this happens and soon realises that this group are alternate versions, explaining the events of the past to them and mentioning Jacques. Michelle jumps at hearing his name and the Oni realise that the language barrier is gone, Akko claiming responsibility. Once everyone is caught up to speed, Michelle is called to help her men in the sewers and the Oni agree to help. As is fairly common in these scenarios, this section goes unchanged, if only they make it a little faster due to Keijiro's strength while pushing the metal ball through the gutter. Jacques' phone rings after they reach Notre Dame, and Michelle takes the group to Jacques' house to meet Henri. While the boy is initially intimidated by Keijiro's size, the Oni can only chuckle, feeling reminded of his defiant nature when he was just a kid, and his now free-spirited personality helps him and Henri get on rather well, trying to calm him down when noticing his poor relationship with Michelle. Akko returns to the past, and Jacques and Keijiro agree to start moving, deciding to try and meet up with Samanosuke and Kaede. They notice the beeping in the crate, however, and Jacques recognises the watches as something from his own time. Samanosuke is heard mentioning Sakai as the sender as he and Kaede return to Enryaku Temple, confirming that they actually managed to catch and slay Ranmaru thanks to Kaede's speed, cutting him off before he could escape. Being forced to try and fight off both Oni, Ranmaru was completely outmatched and defeated by the pair. Relieved that he won't be a problem now, they identify the Torea stamp on the delivery crate and agree to head there to find out more. Upon reaching Sakai, the group split up, with Samanosuke heading for the docks, Keijiro checking the back streets, Kaede scouting the rooftops, and Jacques speaking with the Torea merchant directly. Honestly, this section is also relatively unchanged, though Keijiro once again gets noticeably angry upon hearing Guildenstern's name after Jacques presents the scientist's journal to the group, forcing him to be calmed down before checking the western ship. They are confronted by Heihachi, but he decides to challenge Keijiro instead of Samanosuke, not only due to his feared reputation, but also because it's the closest they can get to a spear versus spear match. Of course, once the ship leaves, the other Oni are forced to join the fight in order to speed it up and reach it. In the end, it goes the same, with Heihachi being pushed back, Akko retrieving the key from Henri, and Jacques using his bike to reach the ship while the others are left in Sakai. Once Jacques reaches the ship, Heihachi reapproaches the group and they are forced to work together to push back the Genma in Sakai. Samanosuke and Kaede stay at the drawbridge while Keijiro sticks with Heihachi. In the future, Akko gives them the rundown on Jacques and they soon receive Guildenstern's phone call telling them to head to Notre Dame's basement. The Oni reach Notre Dame, and after finding the anti-darkness charm and purifying the statues, Kaede is the one to take the Oni air orb, granting her the Oni shuriken Kaze. They soon reach Guildenstern and learn of his plot to master time folds, and are forced to fight off the Dordo as the scientist flees. Once they're defeated, Samanosuke tells Kaede to head back to Michelle and Henri in order to protect them should Guildenstern and the Genma try anything, leaving himself and Keijiro to follow Guildenstern to the Undersea Temple. Much of this section also remains identical, with Jacques also arriving to the temple as Akko meets him through the use of the Oni time mirror, and the both of them transferring discs to open sections of the temple. Samanosuke and Keijiro find Guildenstern in the Eastern Chamber, and are soon met with Genma Ranmaru, the latter being particularly angry at Keijiro for the humiliation he received at the Oni's hands. Naturally, facing down both Oni is far beyond his ability, and he is forced to flee, Keijiro mustering only light pity for the young Mori's fate. Soon, Heihachi and Keijiro use the Oni dust to open a gateway to the temple to retrieve the crimson stone necessary to repair the drawbridge, though when they find Jacques, Keijiro quickly tells him that they have an agreement for now, though decides to leave Heihachi to go back to Sakai while Keijiro sticks with Jacques. Heihachi doesn't argue and returns to Sakai with the Crimson Stone to repair the drawbridge, telling Samanosuke and Kaede of Keijiro's decision to remain at the temple. Like normal, Heihachi refuses to answer the two when asked about his allegiance to Tokugawa, and simply bids them farewell. In the temple, Jacques shows Keijiro the Time Lab journal, with Akko mentioning Guildenstern's goal to master time folds, and Keijiro once again gets noticeably angry at the mention of the Genma's name, apologising as Jacques asks what's wrong. He explains in greater detail that it was Guildenstern who had prepared both himself and Yuki to be sacrificed to the late Genma King Fortinbras before Samanosuke and Kaede saved their lives, and developed a deep hatred for the scientist ever since. Knowing how much of an effect such a traumatic event would have had on a child, Jacques understands Keijiro's reaction and promises that they'll bring him down, and they continue through the temple. In the future, once power is restored to the temple, Keijiro obtains the final Oni orb and gains ownership of an earth-based single-bladed battle axe known as Miburui. Once the Oni open the northern chamber, Jacques uses his whip to help Keijiro across the gap and they both confront Gertrude. Naturally, with both of them working together, Gertrude is defeated far quicker than usual, with Jacques pulling a lot more weight now than he did during their battle with Marcellus. Gertrude's body still cracks the glass, forcing the two to escape the temple on the nearby Genma train before the temple floods. Once they get a chance to rest, Akko returns to the future and tells of the train. This leads to Ranmaru attempting to ambush the two Oni, but they are far too much for him to overcome, leading to him triggering his trap. However, as Ranmaru tries to have Samanosuke incapacitated by the electricity, Keijiro reacts on quick impulse and slams Samanosuke out of the way, taking the hit in place of him. Ranmaru cackles and tells Samanosuke that Keijiro will become a Genma, angering the Oni and causing him to attack the Genma convert, even more so when Keijiro disappears in front of them. Now enraged, Samanosuke relentlessly assaults Ranmaru, and as his Genma blood has yet to stabilise within his body, he is too weak to repel the attack and is once again defeated, with Samanosuke now taking the chance to kill him instead of letting him escape again. With Keijiro now missing, Samanosuke and Akko agree to head back to Jacques' house to inform Kaede and begin figuring out a way to find him. Akko decides to warp to give her a more immediate heads up, and upon learning of Keijiro's disappearance, Kaede is immediately horrified and rushes to meet with Samanosuke at Notre Dame. Henri, the defiant child he is about to follow, but both Kaede and Michel tell him to stay to avoid any Genma encounters. Henri angrily refuses to listen, but Akko decides to try and defuse the situation via a compromise, having Henri come along so long as he and Michel don't split off from the Oni to ensure nobody is ambushed by the Genma. Henri is annoyed at having to be watched by Michel, but Kaede insists it's for his own safety, stressing that it's just because Michel cares. Being essentially outvoted, Henri relents and agrees, since it at least means that he doesn't have to just sit back the whole time. They meet Samanosuke outside of Notre Dame, and the Oni desperately try to come up with some idea as to where Keijiro is taken, but with no leads, they instead head back to the house to safely reread Guildenstern's notes and attempt to get some sort of clue from them. After a couple of hours, however, they are left with no ideas, getting further distressed at Keijiro's potential fate at the Genma's hands. Eventually, Kaede suggests rechecking the basement of Notre Dame to see if any leftover notes remain that would give them a clue, and the group agree. Upon arriving and entering the basement, they encounter two Dordo breaking through the debris and dispatch them, leading to them finding a note mentioning Boulogne-Mizu. Hopeful that they now have some kind of direction, Michel drives them all there. Henri, still unwilling to sit back and do nothing, sticks close to the group as they find the key to the lab building and ride the boat towards the cells, only to find them empty, further worrying the Oni. As they're checking them, Guildenstern appears and kidnaps both Michel and Henri to convert them into Genma, leading to Samanosuke and Kaede rushing through the door to find Guildenstern preparing to experiment on the two. While he's annoyed that he's been interrupted with Michel and Henri, he cackles that they still weren't fast enough this time, telling them that after 22 years, they had finally failed to save little Yumemaru. The fact that he uses Keijiro's old name causes their hearts to drop as he continues to torment them, telling him that while he tried to maintain an outward hope that the Oni would reach him in time, Guildenstern could see the same fear he once held as a child, reveling in Keijiro's terror. As to be expected, the two Oni are enraged by this, but Guildenstern gleefully offers to reunite them and calls his newest creation to face them, telling them that he hopes they enjoy their reunion as footsteps are heard behind them, the Oni turning to find a half-converted Keijiro with rage in his eyes. As Samanosuke and Kaede stammer, trying to string together a full sentence through the horror of seeing Keijiro like this, Guildenstern introduces this new convert not as Keijiro, but as Laertes, commanding him to destroy the Oni that abandoned him as he teleports away. They try to apologise for being too late, but Laertes isn't having it, now expressing regret in fighting for them. He trusted them, gave everything for them for the past 9 years, and he, in turn, was abandoned and left to die. He should never have re-established contact, and should never have sacrificed himself to save Samanosuke. Hearing such venom from him only further breaks their hearts, and he raises his new Oni battle axe and promises to repay them, forcing the two to defend themselves from his fury. No matter what attempts they make to convince him, he refuses to back down and makes clear his intentions to kill them, leaving the two no choice but to fight back. While they attempt to simply avoid or parry his attacks, unwilling to land anything that could kill him, they begin to see that his movements and attacks are a bit unfocused, sometimes even missing the intended target entirely. In the end, however, the two realise that they have no choice but to put him down, not knowing how they could possibly reverse his conversion, and take advantage of these random open moments. Eventually, this allows them to outmaneuver and defeat Laertes, with Samanosuke taking a final swing expecting Laertes to block, but the convert stops just beforehand, almost allowing Samanosuke's attack to land. It becomes clear by now that his conversion being only half complete also meant that a semblance of his mind still remained, desperately trying to struggle against his now dominant Genma side, causing him to falter during their battle. While Guildenstern had about 2 to 3 more hours of time to work on converting Keijiro, it wasn't enough to complete the process, leading to constant internal conflict within his mind and soul. As he lay at their feet, his body also struggling against the Genma blood, he becomes more lucid and apologises for his violence, assuring them that he didn't blame them despite what was initially said. Samanosuke and Kaede can't help but tearfully apologise anyway, but Keijiro weakly chuckles, joking that saving Samanosuke from Ranmaru's trap means that perhaps they're finally even. However, he just as quickly shifts to a more serious look and asks if they'll do one final favour for him, asking them to finish him off. The two are obviously unwilling to kill him, but he warns that his Genma blood will eventually overtake him entirely, and with no way to reverse his conversion, he doesn't want to risk hurting them or anyone else, pleading for him to die as a human rather than live as a Genma, taking the chance to remove his gauntlet from his arm to prevent him from using it for the Genma again. Understanding that he's right, Samanosuke agrees to his final request and prepares to mercy kill him, Keijiro thanking them one last time for saving him and Yuki 22 years prior as Samanosuke's sword pierces his heart. With this, Keijiro takes his last breath with a smile, knowing that Guildenstern had ultimately failed once again. Being half Genma, his body shrivels away, leaving only his gauntlet and orb, and as Michelle and Henri are freed from confinement, they learn of Keijiro's death and give the two Oni a chance to mourn, with them soon vowing to destroy Guildenstern for his actions. As the Oni ready themselves to keep going, Michelle calls out to them and shows them a picture of Mont Saint-Michel, the group agreeing that it's likely where the time folder is held. Once Henri speaks with his mother in the afterlife, he decides not to protest when Samanosuke and Kaede ask that he and Michelle stay put and wait for them, especially with how easily Guildenstern was able to capture them before. Once they find a time mirror, Kaede asks Akko to take the Earth Orb to the past Keijiro and tell him what happened, to which Akko sorrowfully agrees. Once Jacques and Keijiro reach Mont Saint-Michel, Akko arrives and delivers the orb, confusing the two of them. She begins to tear up herself a little as she describes the events leading up to Keijiro's conversion and death in the future, saying that Samanosuke and Kaede felt it only right for him to have his future self's Oni orb. While Keijiro is shocked at the knowledge of his future self's death, he expresses only regret that it had to be done, feeling the need to place zero blame on Samanosuke or Kaede, especially considering that his future self prevented Samanosuke's conversion as a result. If anything, this only further reinforces his loyalty to them, vowing to do the same if necessary. As he now holds his Oni battle axe, Miburui, once again, the two are quickly confronted by Heihachi and forced to fight him once he notices Vega Donna watching. They, of course, defeat him and watch as Vega descends toward them to order their deaths, only for Heihachi to finally refuse and walk away from the Genma. From here, Mont Saint-Michel continues with practically no changes despite the presence of Kaede in the future and Keijiro in the past, with the only real difference being that Keijiro's presence means that they are able to rescue the slaves faster and more efficiently. The two are soon caught in the monastery's gas trap, and once Henri figures out the solution, his connection to Jacques means he's the only one to regain consciousness and disarm it. Once the gas dissipates, he wakes up Keijiro and helps him catch his breath, the both taking the chance to recover. As the future group leave the monastery's basement, the screen in the main hall turns on, only it's Guildenstern that's seen since Ranmaru is already dead by now, proudly announcing that his time folder is now complete and inviting them to see it, at least providing that they are able to survive. With that, the Genma mechanism begins to destruct and the group flee the castle, leading to Samanosuke and Kaede facing and defeating a reawakened Gertrude and barely escaping the explosion to head for the Eiffel Tower. Akko soon returns to Jacques and Keijiro, relieved to see them both alive, and they reach Vega as the Hyume is about to launch. Jacques quickly pulls out Ryzan, using one end to grab the castle before it launches and the other to pull Keijiro along as well to ensure he isn't left behind, allowing both to escape Mont Saint-Michel's destruction and hide within one of the retracting legs for the duration of the journey. As they both fall out over Lake Biwa, Keijiro grabs Jacques while they fall and pulls out Hariken, using wind magic to soften their fall as he did with Samanosuke with the Genma tank. Remember, it was only the future group that lost their Oni weapons, so Keijiro in the past still has Hariken on hand when needed. Having survived their fall, Akko leaves to find past Samanosuke and Kaede and leads them both to Lake Biwa to find them, Heihachi also joining now that he's abandoned the Genma. Once Heihachi vows to fight alongside them, the group agree to find the Oni army orb, and it goes similar to canon, with Heihachi heading to Azuchi Castle to have someone on the inside while the Oni search for the orb itself. Keijiro gets trapped with Jacques and helps him make it through the traps in Genma inside the mansion, while Samanosuke and Kaede find another way inside, meeting them once the orb is found and agreeing that it's time to storm Azuchi Castle. Since an all-out battlefront isn't something that Kaede is really suited for, she agrees to be the one to utilise and control the Oni army orb, while Samanosuke, Keijiro and Jacques join the army and push through the Genma. With 3 Oni warriors joining the fight, the Genma forces are steamrolled entirely, so much so that by the time they reach Heihachi in the castle and tell him that Kaede is controlling the army, she actually shows up and tells them that the Genma have already been annihilated. With Ranmaru having already been killed after their first encounter at Mount Hiei, he is not able to divert Heihachi away from climbing the castle with the Oni, meaning he actually joins them as they ascend towards Vega. Naturally, 4 Onis and Heihachi leaves Marcellus unable to fight back whatsoever as he is overpowered and killed before he even has a chance to transform his weapon, and they soon reach Vega at the top of the castle. Seeing just how outnumbered and outmatched she clearly is here, she almost considers fleeing, but her own narcissistic pride, alongside the sight of Heihachi driving her to anger for his betrayal, causes her instead to stay in the hopes of proving Genma superiority over all else. I'd honestly argue that aside from Heihachi, any one of those present could bring down Vega, so it's not hard to imagine just how poor of a decision it is for her to stay and fight in a 5-on-1 battle, with her being so overwhelmed by the Oni that even Heihachi is able to land a good few hits without even taking one himself. Obviously, Vega is very quickly overwhelmed and defeated, and the group reach the attic once the hidden staircase drops, only to discover an unsent letter to Nobunaga penned by Vega promising to soon reunite with him in order to quash Mitsuhide's incoming rebellion together. Again, with no Ranmaru, there's no trap for Heihachi to succumb to, so he survives the Azuchi assault, and while racking their brains to figure out where Nobunaga is, Jacques suddenly remembers the words of the Oni god, telling the group that the Oni mentioned a battle at Honnouji Temple. Further searching through more unsent letters eventually confirms this as Nobunaga's location, so the group decide to meet with Mitsuhide's rebellion and attack Honnouji, with Heihachi also agreeing in the hopes of seeing Nobunaga fall. Akko returns to the future and informs them of the incoming assault at Honnouji, and Samanosuke and Kaede agree that whether or not they succeed, they must destroy the Time Folder as well as Guildenstern, climbing the tower to confront the scientist. The climb itself goes as normal, and the two soon confront Guildenstern, with the scientist further mocking the death of Yumemaru, angering the two as they vow to ensure he pays for it. Guildenstern, realising that all of his creations have failed him, finally decides to face the Oni himself, promising that once they're defeated, the age of the Genma will finally begin. Unfortunately for him, the teamwork of Samanosuke and Kaede is far too much for Guildenstern despite his attempts to utilise time folds against them, and he is soon defeated. As he lay at their feet, he can only cackle as he tells them that they're too late once again, that the time folder is already active and will soon bring Nobunaga to them even if he dies. The time folder lights up as he says this, and as they try to force Guildenstern to tell them how to stop it, he only whispers that he can finally see the age of the Genma, calling it beautiful as he finally succumbs to his wounds. As he shrivels away, they tell Ako to join the Honnoji assault to ensure Nobunaga doesn't make it to the future. In the past, the party arrived to aid Mitsuhide, who is delighted that so many are willing to back him, including Heihachi. The assault itself proceeds, and the presence of 4 Onis and Heihachi tips the odds so far in Mitsuhide's favour that they only lose about 1 or 2 men before reaching the temple itself and confronting the Genma Lord. The normally confident Nobunaga can't help but be concerned at the prospect of fighting a 5v1 battle against 4 Onis and a Master Spearman, but is forced to face them anyway, hoping that his unnatural speed and power will give him the edge. Again, with all 5 of them present and working together, Nobunaga is clearly outmatched here, being unable to incapacitate even Heihachi, let alone Samanosuke, and he is soon defeated. With this victory, the time folder begins to pull Jacques back to the future, and the party thank him for his aid and say their goodbyes as a fold surrounds him. However, Nobunaga soon gets up, and instead of launching a fireball, he zooms behind Kaede and lands a sneak attack, stabbing her in the torso and killing her before anyone can react. Shocked as everyone is, Keijiro immediately rushes the Warlord in a blind rage, but Nobunaga zips behind him and launches a fireball, doing the same to Heihachi as he attempts to back Keijiro up, leaving the both of them incapacitated as Nobunaga turns his attention to Samanosuke. Ako decides to rush to the future to try and get their aid as Jacques warps to the future as well, leaving past Samanosuke to face Nobunaga alone. Jacques reappears at the base of the Eiffel Tower and reunites with his family, bidding farewell to Samanosuke and Kaede as they return to their time to finish their battle with Nobunaga. Of course, with Ranmaru dead in the future as well, Jacques isn't forced to trade his Oni power to revive Henri, so he actually keeps it for the foreseeable future. Samanosuke and Kaede return to the past and rush into the temple, only to find Nobunaga removing his blade from past Samanosuke's torso, leaving Keijiro and Heihachi the only ones left alive in the aftermath. Nobunaga is shocked into inaction upon seeing the two, unable to react as Samanosuke throws future Keijiro's gauntlet to past Keijiro, allowing him to absorb its power as the two do the same from their deceased doubles, telling Heihachi to flee while they handle Nobunaga. Heihachi only stays long enough to witness the awakening of 3 Onimushas at the same time, and can easily see that this fight is far beyond him, heeding Samanosuke's words and leaving them to face Nobunaga. Now staring into the eyes of 3 separate Onimushas, Nobunaga decides to tap into his full power from the get-go, transforming into his empowered Genma form in an attempt to combat them. On top of Samanosuke's balanced abilities as an Onimusha, the enhanced speed and agility of Onimusha Kaede, combined with the now monstrous raw strength of Onimusha Keijiro, leaves Nobunaga in an impossible situation, and he is easily overcome by the Oni. With him now admitting defeat once they return to their human forms, Samanosuke uses the anti-darkness charm to absorb and seal Nobunaga within his gauntlet, helping Kaede carry an exhausted Keijiro from the temple before it crumbles on top of them. They soon meet up with Heihachi and tend to his wounds alongside Keijiro. The Oni each moves almost to tears at the sight of each other's survival. With the Genma now beaten, all 3 Oni decide to change their identities, with Samanosuke becoming Tenkai Nankobo, Kaede becoming Otsune, and Keijiro changing his name to Matsukaze. Now seeing Heihachi as a true ally and friend, they trust him enough with the knowledge of their survival and ask him to reveal their true identities to no one, to which Heihachi agrees as he bids them farewell, deciding to return to Ieyasu Tokugawa. While he still believes that he did the right thing, he understands that his actions would be considered treasonous and is ready to accept his punishment with honour. With the Oni having faked their deaths at Hanoji, they prepare to seal Samanosuke's gauntlet to ensure Nobunaga never rises again. While Ako has grown fond of the group, she does not fall for Tenkai this time. One reason being that he still has Otsune, and Ako knows better than to try and come between them. The main reason, however, is that she instead becomes more fixated on Matsukaze, with her bubbly attitude melding quite well with Matsu's more free-spirited nature. That isn't to say that the two become a couple, but she basically sees him the way she sees Tenkai in canon. While Matsu doesn't share this infatuation, the two do eventually build a more platonic partners in crime kind of bond rather than a romantic one. Of course, she does still become human-sized and takes the name Arin as she and the Oni base themselves at Enryaku Temple to guard both Tenkai's gauntlet and the Oni Gate, with Matsu and Otsune essentially acting as agents for Tenkai and Arin. Heihachi returns to Mikawa province to face punishment for his actions, but when Ieyasu learns the truth from Heihachi, the spearman is shocked when Ieyasu decides to keep Heihachi's involvement in Nobunaga's defeat a secret, revealing to him his personal disdain for the Genma as well as his expectations that Nobunaga would have fallen anyway due to relying on them. In the end, Heihachi gets off extremely lightly, not only because of Ieyasu's disdain for the Genma, but also because Nobunaga's death had actually left multiple of the Genma lords' once subservient provinces without a ruler, and with the Genma now gone from the land, those provinces were open for conquest, giving the Tokugawa clan a chance to expand. Heihachi is left grateful beyond words, vowing that his loyalty to Ieyasu will persist even beyond his death. Unfortunately for Ieyasu, Hideyoshi Hashiba, having returned from Bichu province and already emerged victorious in the Battle of Yamazaki, begins his own conquest of Japan, leading to the two clashing in the 1584 Battle of Komaki and Nagakute, a battle that ends in a stalemate before the two make peace with one another. This obviously leads to Ogimaru being sent as a hostage to be adopted by Hideyoshi, though Heihachi requests to be sent with him in order to ensure that he is sufficiently trained. Both sides agree to this, and Heihachi soon becomes the tutor of Ogimaru. Given that Hideyoshi was away in Bichu province when Heihachi opposed Nobunaga, he is unaware of what actually happened, and Ieyasu decides not to say anything since he secretly approves of Heihachi's actions. Over the next few years, Hideyoshi would conquer the country himself, commissioning the Jirakudai Palace in 1586 for the Tokugawa clan, and sending both Ogimaru, now named Hideyasu, and Heihachi to fight in the 1587 Kyushu campaign, unfortunately leading them to partaking in the destruction of a young Roberto's village, costing the life of his mother. Given his own encounters with Hideyoshi when he was named Tokichiro, Matsukaze is the first to show concern about him rising to power, flatly stating that he expects the new lord to begin utilising the Genma much like Nobunaga did. Once the alliance between Hideyoshi and Ieyasu becomes public knowledge, the Oni worry what this means for Heihachi, and Otsune decides to track him down and find out what's going on. She soon learns that Heihachi has been sent to Hideyoshi alongside Hideyasu as a hostage, and she is able to sneak past the guards to make contact with him one night before they leave for the Kyushu campaign. While surprised to see her again so soon, he greets her warmly, and when asked about Tokugawa's alliance, promises that while he may officially be Hideyoshi's vassal, he is still an ally to them as well. Heihachi tells of the young Hideyasu, describing him as a particularly strong warrior despite his age, as well as quite empathetic. Given the man Hideyasu seems to be growing up to be, Heihachi says that he wouldn't be surprised if he chooses to oppose Hideyoshi if the latter goes off the deep end and begins using the Genma. With this assurance, Otsune asks for them to remain in contact for the foreseeable future, and Heihachi agrees, acknowledging that Hideyoshi's future tyranny is a very real possibility. Otsune returns to Mount Hiei to report this meeting to the others, relieving everyone that Heihachi is still allied with them. Now learning of Hideyasu's apparent talent for battle, Tenkai decides to keep a close eye on the young warrior to see exactly what kind of warrior he becomes. Heihachi ends up joining Hideyasu in the 1592 attack on Korea, and is equally horrified by what he witnesses, sharing Hideyasu's decision to lay down their weapons in protest of the savage methods Hideyoshi has begun to rely on. With the Triumvirate having been freed by Mitsunari at this point, they soon learn of the Genma's imminent return and agree to raise their weapons again in opposition. Heihachi is also present at Hideyoshi's tea ceremony at Fushimi in 1596, standing with Hideyasu as the latter decides to make it his mission to kill Hideyoshi, leading to the both of them coming into conflict with Kiyomasa Kato and witnessing firsthand the effects of the Genma insects. This time, however, while Hideyasu is able to adapt and incapacitate Kiyomasa, Heihachi actually takes the opportunity to finish him off as Hideyasu rushes at Hideyoshi. When the Omen Star appears and an earthquake rocks the castle, however, Heihachi is there to witness Hideyasu's Oni awakening, and is telepathically contacted by Tenkai as they are both told to escape. Given that Heihachi has fought alongside the Oni before, he is able to recognise that Hideyasu's awakening was likely related to them, and decides to lead the both of them to Mount Hiei to meet with his Oni allies. While Hideyasu is unconvinced that his power is even Oni adjacent, he agrees to come with him to Enryaku Temple once Heihachi tells of his previous encounter with the Oni. The Oni are prepared for their arrival and welcome them once they arrive, and Arin is quick to recognise that Hideyasu is indeed an Oni, revealing that his second sword, Requiem, is an Oni purification sword. On top of this, Tenkai tells him that he is not only an Oni, but that he is actually the Black Oni, the reincarnation of the Oni god of darkness. Despite this, however, he stresses that he is not yet strong enough to face Hideyoshi as he is. Still visibly angry at his failure to stop Hideyoshi, Hideyasu tells them of the horrors of the foreign war, describing the depths of depravity that soldiers would go to earn personal glory, a fact that Heihachi confirms. While he isn't strong enough yet, Arin promises that there may be a way for him to get stronger in the near future, but as Hideyasu desperately asks how to do so, she tells him that they need to be sure that he's ready to wield that much power before he gets the chance to use it. While this annoys Hideyasu, he begrudgingly agrees once Heihachi stresses to him the importance of patience, though stresses that they can't waste time since Hideyoshi is already performing atrocities in Japan, revealing the existence of the Genma trees. Matsukaze asks what their purpose is, becoming disgusted when told of their function to release Genma insects and turn people into unfeeling fighting machines, as well as the fact that they are created using the bodies of conscious and screaming humans as a base. Hideyasu stresses the need to destroy these trees and halt the spread of insects, and Matsukaze is the first to agree and decides to travel with Hideyasu in order to find them alongside Heihachi and Notsune, the latter deciding to scout ahead and track down the trees. Tenkai decides instead to search for other ways to gain an advantage against the Genma while the rest focus on the trees. Arin can't help but express a bit of worry for them, especially Matsukaze, but they assure her that they'll be fine. With the Omen Star now in view, the Genma soon begin to reappear en masse and ravage the land, leading to an Oni god appearing before the group and deciding to grant Heihachi the Oni's power, citing his previous actions against the Genma as reason enough to trust him with it. This proves fortunate, as the Genma are soon discovered to be immune to human weaponry this time, making this new power a necessity. While not as efficient as the likes of Minokichi, Otsune is able to track down carriages of Genma trees as Hideyoshi begins the process of transporting them to Kyoto for the Daigo festival. As they intercept their first cart, the present Genma, initially threatening death for interfering, are horrified to discover that they are faced with 4 separate Oni warriors, being unsurprisingly defeated with no effort. With the Genma dispatched, Hideyasu and Matsukaze prepare to burn the trees, believing there to be no other way to destroy them. But Heihachi and Otsune stop them, remembering Arin's words concerning Hideyasu's second sword. With it being labelled as an Oni purification sword, he agrees to at least try that first, driving it into the nearest tree. To everyone's shock, the sword's magic ends up engulfing the tree, purifying it as well as the people trapped inside, who soon begin to wake up having been freed from their painful confinement. Elated that they are now able to not only destroy the trees but also save the lives of every human trapped inside, Hideyasu purifies the rest of the trees present and saves the people within, allowing them all to escape as they express unimaginable gratitude to him and the rest of the Oni. Knowing that saving those sacrificed to become the trees is now a possibility, they continue to do so whenever Otsune is able to track down and lead them to any more, leading to the Oni quickly gaining a reputation across the country as saviours, especially Hideyasu, who not only gains the nickname of Blue Demon, but is also recognised not as the Oni of Ash, but the Oni of Purity, earning the nickname Sojin. The next year, the group end up meeting Minokichi, and with the use of his Mino clan contacts allowing him to track the trees more efficiently, Otsune decides to join Tenkai while the rest focus on the trees, confident that 3 Oni warriors is still more than enough to handle any Genma they encounter. This causes her to be present in the Yagyu village during Munenori and Ophelia's attack. When Ophelia first appears to bind them, she is immediately threatened by the sight of Otsune's gauntlet, realising that at least one of them is an Oni, further shaken at the sight of Jubei's Oni awakening. When Tenkai breaks Ophelia's magic after keeping her occupied, he and Otsune both combine their purification magic and use her own gauntlet as a base instead of calling Arin to deliver Tenkai's gauntlet. This proves just as effective to incapacitate Ophelia while Jubei strikes Munenori. Ophelia and Munenori are forced to retreat, and the 2 Oni watch as Jubei begins her journey to hunt down and kill her uncle, deciding that it would be best if she met with Sojin in the near future. By now, the Oni's saviour reputation has spread significantly across the country, reaching the ears of even Hideyoshi. Angered by this, he demands quick results when Ieyasu promises to deal with Sojin himself. Of course, still content to wait for Hideyoshi's rule to self-destruct, like in the manga, Ieyasu decides not to take any action, while Hidetada, desperate to ensure his succession once Ieyasu dies, contacts the false Tenkai with Hanzo to arrange Sojin's assassination at the hands of Chuju and Ginfa, with Hanzo sending his eager ninjas to track their target down. The Oni's reputation also reaches Jubei, who decides to also seek them out when she has the chance, hoping that it will aid in her search for Munenori. She soon reaches the same village as in the manga and encounters Musashi, though the latter has not actually begun terrorizing the villagers this time due to wanting to match the saviour reputation that the Oni have now gained, hoping to become more like them. He still claims to be an Onimusha and challenges Jubei to a match, annoyed that she doesn't believe him, and initially overpowers her, only to enrage her by going through her belongings and discovering her family's scroll and realising her heritage. It ends the same way when he faints in embarrassment upon realising that he'd just lost to a girl, and they are forced to work together when Kurina's village is attacked by Genma. The next day, she runs into him after she leaves the village, and once Musashi introduces himself to her, accompanies her to Osaka despite her protests. The Oni don't stay at an abandoned village like Soki does in the manga, and this time reach Osaka before Hanzo is able to intercept, his ninjas only finding him once they arrive, and Hanzo decides that Juju and Ginfa are likely not enough for them, choosing to consolidate his forces and attack as one once they leave Osaka. When everyone arrives in Osaka and pass each other, Jubei and Sojin notice a fleeting reaction in their blood. However, given that she is now actively seeking the Oni out, she actually decides to pay a little more attention to it and turns around, managing to catch a glimpse of Heihachi and Matsukaze's gauntlet, causing her to double back and catch up to them. When grabbing their attention, she recognises that they are wearing Oni gauntlets and tells them who she is once pressed, surprising the group that someone so young has now taken the name of Jubei Yagyu. With Musashi present during the conversation, he is practically starstruck at meeting these Oni warriors, bowing and introducing himself, begging for them to help him become as strong as the Onimusha. The group are a bit taken aback by this, and an annoyed Jubei briefly explains her encounter with him, still calling him a phony Musha. Tenkai and Otsune both meet with Okuni in the meantime, telling her that the Onimusha have arrived in Osaka, catching her attention. Soon, the two decide that it's time for them to act and confront Claudius on Sakai's rooftops as the dark stone within the Toyokuni facility begins to activate. With the two of them outnumbering him, he is actually pushed back this time, though still confidently tells them that they cannot win without the Black Oni, only for the two of them to give him a knowing smirk, causing him to quickly work out that they have likely already found him. With this knowledge, he decides it best to flee, knowing that they are still unable to stop the Dark Stone. While panic ensues throughout the city, the rest of the Oni begin trying to lead the inhabitants to safety, fearing that something awful is about to happen. Tenkai and Otsune return to Okuni and encourage her and her troop to do the same, and they all meet up together to escape the city, Tenkai and Otsune not really having the chance to comment on the presence of Jubei and Musashi. Thankfully, with the people more trusting of them due to their positive reputation, the Oni are able to lead most of the civilians out of the city before it is destroyed by the Dark Stone as it releases a shockwave. But when it does, Sojin refuses to run and instead chooses to rush back to try and find any more survivors. While those like Okuni and Musashi think he's crazy to go back, the Oni ultimately decide to back him up and end up standing as a full team against the Genma, Okuni having sent the rest of her troop to flee before she joins the fight as well. Given that Okuni has canonically killed Genma even after they become immune to humans, it can be assumed that she is an Oni in some form, or at least wields similar power to allow her to kill them, meaning that right now, this group is now consisting of 7 Oni warriors as well as Musashi, who, while unable to outright kill them, has shown to be more than strong enough to overpower them. Naturally, this means that the Genma assault is repelled, though the group are forced to watch Sojin tap into his black power to destroy the Genma giants. This frightening display of power completely floors the rest of the party, including Tenkai and Otsune, and the defeat of the Genma only further increases their reputation. Jubei decides to stay with them from here on out, and Musashi is practically in hero worship mode, refusing to let them leave him behind and wanting to become their disciple. Despite his age and lack of Oni power, Matsukaze and Heihachi notice his ability to smash opposing Genma into submission and think that he has legitimate potential. They begin to talk with him as the party make their way back to Mount Hiei, with Jubei begrudgingly admitting that while not really an Onimusha, he is still surprisingly strong, causing Musashi to remark that even if she thinks he isn't one at the moment, he is now able to become one once he learns how to match their strength. Matsukaze chimes in, telling Musashi that being an Oni is not simply decided by strength alone, something that only confuses Musashi since the Onimusha were always hailed as the pinnacle of strength, but Matsu says that they each have their own reasons behind that strength, as opposed to just being strong for the sake of it. Having travelled a fair distance from Osaka by now, Matsu asks to test Musashi's strength in a one-on-one, something Musashi is thrilled to accept, excited to witness his power firsthand while the rest step back to spectate. You'd think that this would be an instant win for Matsukaze, but we know that Musashi's strength is comparable to Oni warriors at this point, simply lacking the ability to finish Genma off, so Musashi is able to actually put up a decent fight against Matsu. In the end, however, Matsu is able to get the better of Musashi and comes out the victor, much to nobody's surprise, including Musashi himself, disappointed at his loss but unsurprised that he was unable to defeat an Onimusha. Matsu and the rest of the group are rather impressed at Musashi's strength as he helps the young warrior up, telling of his own reasons for his strength, still hoping to repay his debt to Tenkai and Otsune for their deeds decades prior and prevent the Genma from victimizing anyone else like they almost did him. This answer surprises Musashi, and both Tenkai and Otsune chime in themselves, telling him that being an Oni requires being strong for those who can't be, fighting to ensure that others don't have to. This revelation gives Musashi pause, but as he takes Matsu's hand and gets up, he promises that he will find similar reasoning, Jubei joking that she's surprised he could get through his thick head. Before Musashi can snap back, Tenkai and Otsune notices that the party is suddenly surrounded, Heihachi looking up to recognise the face of Hanzo, a name that Otsune recognises as being a high-ranking member of the Iga Ninjas. Hanzo comments that he wasn't expecting Onimusha to have so many allies, clicking his fingers to summon Juju and Ginfa at his side. Though upon hearing Otsune recognise him, he is actually able to put two and two together and realise that she is in fact Kaede, angrily calling her out for betraying the Iga clan decades prior. Hanzo demands to know what made her turn traitor, but Otsune tells him that her loyalty blinded her to the wrongs committed by the Iga ninjas and calls out his allegiance with a Genma. Hanzo just smirks in response and says that he simply does what's necessary to complete his mission, ordering his men as well as Juju and Ginfa to attack the Oni, lunging himself towards Otsune as he does. As his ninjas surround the party, the faster fighters like Jubei and Okuni are first to respond and fight back, backed up by Matsukaze, Heihachi, and even Musashi, the latter of which joining since these ninjas are not Genma, leaving him capable of killing them if necessary. Sojin and Tenkai team up against Juju and Ginfa as their combined assault proves difficult to defend against alone, leaving Otsune and Hanzo to clash one-on-one. Despite their speed and numbers, the combined might of the Oni as well as Musashi's power and endurance prevents them from being able to land a hit on even him, let alone the rest of the Oni, and their teamwork leads to them slowly but surely overcome and slay the Iga ninjas. As this is happening, Hanzo demands to know what made Kaede turn traitor, still deciding to use her previous identity, but Otsune tells him that somebody showed her the errors of blind loyalty, vowing then to never raise her blade on an innocent life again. Hanzo can only call her pathetic for this as he continues to try and outmaneuver her, but Otsune's greater experience is enough to keep him in check and prevent him from breaking through her defences. Now getting frustrated, he shouts at Juju and Ginfa to help him, the two also having been unable to overwhelm the team of Sojin and Tenkai, but Sojin is able to land a powerful blow on Ginfa as his attention becomes split by the sudden order, flooring the beast before it can attack Otsune. Juju quickly tries to fire her changed blades at her, but Tenkai reacts fast enough to throw one of his charms, the explosions knocking her chains off target. Seeing their attempts hindered causes an angry Hanzo to call the two absolutely useless, something that the group notices, especially Otsune, and as Sojin disarms Juju of her umbrella and subdues her, Hanzo's growing frustration leads him to falter and is soon struck by Otsune, now left at her mercy on the ground as the rest of the ninjas have also fallen by this point. With his attempted assassination a failure, Otsune demands to know who hired him for the job, but Hanzo doesn't answer, hoping to at least get the satisfaction of knowing that the Oni will learn nothing from him. This is, of course, before he quickly remembers the presence of Heihachi, who identifies him as another vassal of the Tokugawa clan, causing an angered Hanzo to call out Sojin and Heihachi's betrayal of Ieyasu, promising dire consequences from Ieyasu himself. Heihachi can only smirk at this, confusing the fallen ninja, and revealing Ieyasu's disdain for the Genma, telling him that using one for his own ends would make him the traitor instead. Looking back to see that even Ginfa is subdued as well, he can only curse Otsune and Heihachi, unsurprised that traitors choose to ally with other traitors. Sojin, tired of Hanzo's ranting, decides that there's nothing more to gain from him and prepares to finish him off, but Otsune stops him, asking Sojin to let her do it instead, labelling it her responsibility as a former Iga. Noting Hanzo's blind loyalty to his benefactor as she approaches him, she tells him that she hopes he will understand in the next life, swiftly decapitating him with her naginata. With Hanzo and his ninjas now dead, Matsukaze asks what they should do with Juju and Ginfa, with Musashi quickly asserting that they should kill them too, but Okuni tells him to calm down, also noting that Hanzo seemed to treat the two like slaves. Tenkai, after taking a closer look, soon realizes that Juju is actually a human Genma hybrid, but given the circumstances, agrees with Okuni alongside Otsune, thinking that she and Ginfa were more of a threat simply because Hanzo forced them to be. One by one, the party agree that killing them would be cruel and unnecessary, and Otsune gently approaches and tells Juju that they can leave, asking her simply not to hurt anyone since her slaver is now dead. Juju freezes a little in surprise, having trouble processing the fact that she is being spared even with the knowledge of her existence as a half Genma. But as the party decide to leave the two to their own devices, she eventually mounts Ginfa as it approaches her and they flee into the night. Musashi remains confused at this decision, asking why they spared a Genma, but Matsukaze reminds him of the importance of empathy to match strength, agreeing that regardless of her heritage, she was, in the end, another victim. While not sure it was a good idea, Musashi decides not to argue and openly hopes that they made the right call. Jubei soon chimes in to ask Heihachi whether or not Ieyasu would really approve of what he's doing since Hanzo was one of his agents. But Heihachi insists that Ieyasu contracting this attempted assassination simply wouldn't make sense, telling them that despite the knowledge of his betrayal of Nobunaga 15 years prior, he faced practically no punishment. Sojin agrees that it doesn't add up, instead deciding that since Sojin was the initial target before he zeroed in on Otsune, it could have easily been someone within the Tokugawa family, suggesting his brother Hidetada due to his infamously obsessive ambition to succeed their father, Heihachi agreeing that it is a likely possibility. At this accusation, Musashi is quick to encourage decisive action against Hidetada, but Otsune discourages the idea, warning that taking such drastic action without knowing the facts could be worse than doing nothing. Having complete faith in Ieyasu's innocence in this, Heihachi suggests that he consult with Ieyasu to try and indirectly discover whether or not he truly had any involvement, Okuni deciding to join him to try and aid in the negotiation. Though requested by Heihachi, Sojin is unwilling to see Ieyasu yet, though also mentions the reasoning of needing to be present to continue purifying Genma trees. While Heihachi clearly sees that Sojin is just not comfortable being in his family's presence right now, he accepts that Sojin does make a good point, and they agree that Sojin should stay, though Otsune agrees to join in his place in order to keep watch from the shadows in case any more assassins like Hanzo show up. With this, the three leave for the Jurakudai Palace as the rest stay behind to continue tracking down and purifying more trees. While the three make their way towards Ieyasu, the rest manage to intercept another carriage of trees led by Danyamon on its way to a newly built warehouse in Suruga. By this point, this encounter happens around 6 months earlier than it does in canon, so this is among the first set of trees actually sent there, meaning that the warehouse is pretty much empty at this point, so there's no rumours of it being filled with trees. As they confront Danyamon, he is quick to recognise Sojin this time, as Hideyoshi has by now warned his forces of the Oni's attempts to purify his trees, though Danyamon can't help but inwardly realise that he is completely outmatched here, deciding to challenge Sojin alone instead of walking into an unwinnable 5v1 battle. Sojin accepts and leaves Matsukaze, Tenkai, Jubei and Musashi to handle the nearby Genma as he does battle with Danyamon, though this barely lasts seconds as the present Genma are unable to even take a swing at them given how outmatched they are as well, leaving the rest of the group to simply stand back and watch as Sojin trivializes his own battle, only interfering when Danyamon desperately tries to spawn more Genma reinforcements. Obviously, this battle doesn't last long as Sojin cuts down Danyamon, leaving the group to purify the trees and send the now rescued captives on their way. This is witnessed by Munenori and Ohatsu from the nearby rooftops, the former worried that he may need to intervene despite not wanting to, though his tone shifts when Ohatsu recognises Sojin, now wanting to let things play out a little bit longer. He of course notices Jubei's presence as well, chuckling upon the realization that she was picked as his assassin before telling Ohatsu that it's time to go. However, before the two are able to leave, Jubei notices her demon eye beginning to sting again like it did in the Yagyu village, suddenly darting her head as if scanning the area for anything, soon noticing the two on the rooftops and angrily calling out Munenori's presence, much to his annoyance. The rest of the party look up and see them as well, with Sojin reacting with shock at the sight of Ohatsu, unsure what she's even doing here. Jubei is quick to challenge Munenori, but he reacts with indifference, still having a distaste for sword fighting, though is quick to prevent Ohatsu from interacting with Sojin when the latter attempts to speak with her, angering Sojin as he draws his sword on Munenori as well. While Munenori is annoyed at the situation and is now more inclined to kill them, he knows that fighting all 5 of them is beyond even his abilities, and tells Ohatsu once again to leave, but Jubei rushes up and attempts to strike him, refusing to let him get away and demanding that the rest of them refrain from interfering. Musashi attempts to rush in and help her, but Matsu holds him back, telling him that Munenori is way out of his league right now. Seeing that he has no choice, he prepares to face Jubei and orders Ohatsu to help fight off the rest of them, sadistically chucking at the fact that Sojin and Ohatsu don't want to fight one another. While she initially hesitates, Munenori is quick to remind her that he holds her life in his hands, and Ohatsu is left with no choice but to fight, tearfully apologising as she raises her firearm towards them. Not wanting to kill her, Sojin asks the others to let him handle her on his own, and both Tenkai and Matsu agree to step back, though as these two battles go on, Musashi is becoming increasingly antsy, not able to handle the fact that he is expected to just stay back while Jubei and Sojin are locked in emotional and dangerous battles. Ohatsu begs Sojin mid-battle to simply return to Osaka with her and stop fighting Hideyoshi, angering him by using the name Hideyasu as he adamantly refuses to, soon overwhelming and disarming a distraught Ohatsu as he promises to end the nightmare that Hideyoshi has spread throughout the world. While Sojin subdues Ohatsu, they notice that Munenori is starting to overwhelm Jubei, now poised to kill her. As he slashes down, his attack is blocked by Musashi, who rushes to her defense after being unable to stand watching her almost die anymore. While Jubei initially snaps at him for interfering, she and Musashi are quickly forced to focus on the battle as Munenori prepares to counterattack. While the two prove to be a formidable team, with Musashi's strength significantly surprising Munenori at first, Munenori's raw skill and ability proves too much for them to overcome as he begins to gain the advantage over them. But as Sojin attempts to interfere, Ohatsu quickly grabs him and loudly yells that he can't hurt Munenori, though the other Oni notice her also whisper something into his ear. Soon, the two are pushed back entirely, but as Munenori attempts to finish Akane off, Musashi forces himself in the way and takes the hit, horrifying the young Yagyu as he is sent heavily injured to the ground. Suddenly reminded of her grandfather's same act during their last duel, Jubei's rage allows her to tap into her demon eye's power once again, giving her a second wind as she rushes towards her uncle. This time, however, Munenori is prepared and begins upping his game, able to take advantage of Jubei's wrathful and unfocused movements and eventually overwhelm her as well, leaving her floored alongside Musashi. As he once again prepares to kill them, he is, much to his frustration, interrupted again, this time by a gunshot, looking over to see Ohatsu's smoking gun pointed at him as she tells him to leave them alone. Munenori just laughs and further reminds her of her position beneath him, but Ohatsu simply fires again and forces him to back off. With her betrayal solidified, he tells her that she has just sealed her fate, though his confidence is shaken when she suddenly smiles at him, telling him that she isn't his pet anymore. He soon looks over and sees Sojin wielding Requiem, realizing that he took the chance to purify her while he was preoccupied with his own battle. Now angry that he can no longer control her, and promises that he won't let this slide as he uses a smoke bomb to flee. With the threat past, they rush to Musashi and Jubei to tend to their wounds, breathing a collective sigh of relief when they see that their wounds, while heavy, are not fatal, and they take the chance to patch up the worst of their injuries. Ohatsu ends up breaking down a little bit, both extremely guilty for their injuries, but also relieved that she is finally free of Munenori and Hideyoshi's bondage. She profusely apologises for her aggression, revealing that Munenori had forced her to ingest Genma insects under the threat of death, leaving her no choice but to serve Hideyoshi unless she wanted Munenori to trigger them and kill her. Given the circumstances, the group take very little convincing to agree that Ohatsu was not at fault for what happened, and Sojin asks her to join them against Hideyoshi, Ohatsu immediately agreeing to aid them from here on out. With another alliance secured, they grab Musashi and Jubei and begin taking them back to Mount Hiei in order to get the medical attention and report events to Arin. Meanwhile, Heihachi and Okuni arrive at the Jurakudai Palace, with Otsune keeping watch on them from the shadows. The two request an audience with Ieyasu, Okuni turning on the charm a little bit to try and sway the decision, but they are a bit uncertain given Heihachi's reputation for hindering Hideyoshi's trees, questioning his loyalty. Heihachi assures that his loyalty has always been with the Tokugawa house, and one of the guards decides to inform Ieyasu personally to get a decision from him. To their surprise, Ieyasu tells the guards to let the two Oni enter, and they soon meet with the Tokugawa lord. Word of Heihachi and Okuni's arrival spreads quickly throughout the palace, soon reaching Hidetada's ears, and he is immediately terrified, realizing that if Heihachi is here, then Hanzo's assassination attempt must have failed, scared that the spearman has come here for revenge. The Oni stand before Ieyasu and bow, and Ieyasu, while pleased to see Heihachi again after all these years, wants an explanation about Heihachi's recent actions. Heihachi tells him that it was necessary due to the repeated atrocities committed by Hideyoshi, telling Ieyasu of the true purpose of the Genma cherry trees, as well as revealing Sojin's ability to purify them and save those trapped within. Despite the revelation of these things, Ieyasu shows no visible reaction, and Okuni, a little concerned by this, tries to turn on the charm again and says that she can see that he is a fair and just ruler, surely able to see just how much the people are suffering under the Toyotomi clan. Ieyasu simply turns his gaze towards Okuni and sternly stares at her for a few unsettling moments before demanding that everyone else leave the room, Okuni now very worried about where this is going. As the rest of the guards begin leaving the room, Ieyasu warns the two that so brazenly defying Lord Hideyoshi could warrant severe consequences. But once the last of the guards leave the room, Ieyasu's demeanour shifts as he starts smiling at them, saying that those consequences will not be coming from him. Okuni can't help but be surprised at this acceptance of their actions, though Heihachi is much less so given that it isn't the first time for him. Ieyasu asks Heihachi if he remembers what he said about the Genma, and Heihachi confirms, telling Okuni of Ieyasu's disdain for them and belief that Nobunaga's downfall was inevitable the moment he began to utilise them. Heihachi asks Ieyasu about the possibility of rising against Hideyoshi himself, but Ieyasu admits that while he would like to depose Hideyoshi, his forces are simply incapable of defeating him, especially now that the Genma seem impossible to kill by the hands of humans. Heihachi tells him that they have made alliances with others who have proven capable of killing Genma, and with the discovery of Sojin's own Oni heritage, as well as his purification of multiple Genma trees, the support of the people is slowly building as well. Ieyasu quickly asks Heihachi if he plans to make civilians his army against Hideyoshi, and Heihachi hesitates, but Okuni speaks up and says that they simply don't need to. With the steadily building support from the general public, it could possibly lead to a full revolt in the form of halting services and labours, effectively stopping the country from functioning in protest to Hideyoshi's rule. This restores Heihachi's momentum in the discussion, telling Ieyasu that while humans may not be able to kill Genma, they can still fight, telling of Musashi's strength being enough to smash Genma into pieces despite his inability to kill them. With the amount of Oni that have already been recruited, Heihachi raises the possibility of them training the Tokugawa forces to be able to effectively combat the Genma, and Ieyasu begins to ponder that possibility. He asks them what their next move is, and Heihachi says that they're focusing on purifying the trees for the moment, but could well move to more direct defiance in the near future. While Ieyasu isn't convinced to commit to acting against Hideyoshi yet, he asks them to keep him updated if any significant progress is made. Okuni smiles and promises near instant updates as soon as something happens, slightly worrying Heihachi that they'll be able to keep such a promise. But Okuni gives him a look that tells him that she has something genuinely planned. Ieyasu tells her not to make impossible promises, but Okuni assures that it's entirely within their capabilities. With this, Ieyasu tells her that he will hold her to it and expects word soon, though becomes a bit frustrated as he would have assigned Hanzo as a messenger had he not suddenly disappeared recently. The two Oni share a look and decide not to risk burning this new bridge by revealing their killing of the late ninja despite the circumstances, still wanting to be certain of the contractor first. Satisfied with their promise regardless, Ieyasu bids them farewell and the Oni leave the Jurakudai Palace, meeting up with Otsune soon after and informing her of the positive outcome. Otsune is relieved that Ieyasu seemed as open to an alliance as he was, and agrees with them that Ieyasu's confusion regarding Hanzo's disappearance seems genuine. With this success, they begin heading back to Mount Hiei to report to Arin. Once Sojin's group arrive back at Enryaku Temple, Arin is a little surprised to see a couple of new faces, though quickly focuses her attention on Jubei and Musashi upon seeing their injuries, and the group decides to stay and await their recovery. She's soon given a rundown on what happened, including their meeting with Musashi, Jubei and Ohatsu, and Arin is simply happy to know that they've gained additional help, spending time tending to the injured. Ohatsu gains a new outfit like in canon during this time, now that she doesn't need to hide the insect effects on her body with baggy clothes, and Jubei heals up after a couple of days' rest, her demon eye allowing her to recover significantly quicker than expected, though Musashi remains bedridden for a few days longer before waking up. Once Musashi is conscious, Jubei is quick to call him an idiot for interfering in her battle with Munenori, especially given the condition it's left him in, but Musashi says that he couldn't just stand by and watch Munenori kill her. While still being angry at the situation, especially Munenori's escape, she eventually thanks him for trying to help, able to at least see that had nobody interfered, she would likely have not survived. Musashi smirks and says that's what Onimusha do, Matsukaze nodding in agreement. And while Jubei tells him that he still isn't an Oni, she says that if he keeps doing selfless stuff like that, then maybe he will be one day. Heihachi's group arrives soon afterwards, surprised to see a new ally in Ohatsu and learn of the events in Suruga. They inform the rest of their successful meeting with Ieyasu, with Sojin being particularly surprised at his father's willingness to open communications with them. By now, Arin has decided that Sojin is ready for the next step and brings him to the Oni Gate, telling of the trial that will allow him to unlock a new level of power and warning of the time limit. While many present are concerned about the risk, especially Ohatsu, Sojin agrees to take the trial and enters, and it goes almost identically to canon, though after the defeat of Garganto, Marcellus initially appears to halt him, only to be cut down from behind as Laertes appears to challenge him. Recognizing him as a half-converted Matsukaze shocks Sojin to his core, but snaps out of it as Laertes begins assaulting him, forcing Sojin to fight back as the gate closes. Obviously, he is able to tap into his newfound power and push Laertes back, breaking his way out in the same manner as normal. Over the next few days following the trial, Sojin ends up mentioning to Arin and Matsukaze of a Genma within the mansion that resembled Matsu, and Matsu simply tells him that it's a long story for another time, though Arin clearly notices that the events surrounding his future self's conversion still bothers him. In the meantime, Okuni mentions her promise to Ieyasu, asking if Arin can warp to the Jurakudai Palace to deliver a letter updating him. She agrees and leaves the letter where it can be easily found, the letter soon being brought to Ieyasu himself. now learning of Ohatsu's recruitment and Sojin's new increase in power. He pens a reply and leaves it where the letter was first found, Arin having added a request to do so in order to receive his response, and she warps in and grabs it that night to bring it back to Enryaku. The letter requests that Sojin and Musashi be brought to the palace in order for Ieyasu to witness their strength firsthand, both Sojin's new Oni power and the raw strength of Musashi that is capable of incapacitating Genma. While Sojin is still apprehensive of meeting his father, he concedes this time since Ieyasu has made it clear that they are not enemies. Having taken to training Musashi once he fully recovers, Matsukaze decides to join the two as they make their way to the Jirakudai Palace. Once that is decided, Tenkai also brings up the imprisonment of Roberto in Sawayama, the party agreeing to have both Otsune and Jubei act as decoys due to their speed, while Tenkai, Ohatsu, Heihachi and Okuni travel to Sawayama to free the Westerner. This leads them to encountering the same Sawayama guardian Genma, using the hole it created to enter the dungeons and find Roberto, who is quick to break his chains himself once they arrive. Before he leaves to find Luis Frois, Ohatsu steps up and asks for his aid, but Roberto is quick to tell them that Luis is his only concern, though hesitates for a quick moment upon seeing her. She offers to help him in exchange, and Roberto decides to humour them and ask what they want, leading to Tenkai taking over once he sees that the negotiations are seeing results. I know I'm kind of glossing over this interaction, but it's effectively the same one that occurs in a previous What If, and I didn't want to repeat all the details like a broken record. With the promise of finding Luis while aiding the downfall of the Genma, Roberto agrees and leads them through the secret passage, escaping before Sakon is able to find them. The group introduce themselves to him, though Roberto only really responds to Ohatsu, albeit with a sigh, at least until Okuni is about to mention her own name, only for Roberto to beat her to it. She can't help but chuckle and admit that she shouldn't be surprised that her name is known by Westerners as well. The group soon confront Claudius and Rosencrantz at the top of the castle, taking them by surprise and forcing them to flee, knowing that fighting all five would be a bit too much for them, angering Roberto that his target had managed to escape, though Tenkai is at least able to calm him down by assuring him that they'll likely come across him again fairly soon. With their mission complete regardless, they decide to head back to Enryaku Temple and await word from Sojin, Matsu and Musashi. The three arrive at the Jirakudai Palace in the meantime, the guards surprised that Sojin actually agreed to show up, this time allowing the Oni entry without any hassle. Word of Sojin's arrival reaches Hidetada, who at this point is absolutely bricking it, expecting his brother to have come for him. Sojin does meet with Tadayoshi, and while the latter is a bit scared of him, their interaction remains cordial as Sojin holds no real disdain towards him, only really disliking Hidetada due to his ambitious nature. The reunion between Sojin and Ieyasu is a little tense, but also remains fairly cordial, Ieyasu remarking that Sojin has grown stronger since they last met, Sojin telling that it was needed to stop Hideyoshi terrorizing the people. Matsukaze introduces himself, simply saying that he is aiding in the fight against the Genma, and Ieyasu then turns to Musashi, assuming him to be the one said to be able to crush Genma despite his inability to kill them. Musashi responds with confidence, sure of his own strength, and Ieyasu asks for proof, calling one of his most accomplished generals to test the young warrior's abilities. The group turn to witness the arrival of Naomasa Lee, who is pitted in a one-on-one sparring match to determine Musashi's skill. Sojin asks why this is necessary, and Ieyasu responds that if someone like Musashi is capable of defeating the Genma even when the Tokugawa's best can't, then he wants to see just how Musashi fares against one of Ieyasu's best. Matsu warns Musashi not to get overconfident, especially with Naomasa's well-known skill, Sojin sharing the sentiment as the battle begins. While Naomasa's raw skill would normally be too much for most opponents, he is caught off guard by Musashi's raw strength and resilience, barely flinching at most of Naomasa's attacks despite his skill and precision. While Naomasa is unable to land a powerful enough blow to outright break Musashi's defences, he initially proves a bit too fast for Musashi to land a blow either. As the fight wears on, however, Musashi begins to take note of Naomasa's fighting style and begins to adapt, deciding that if he can't find a hole in Naomasa's defense, then he will simply create one. This adaptability also causes him to slowly speed up his own reactions, blocking and parrying more and more of Naomasa's attacks before finally picking his moment to strike, anticipating Naomasa to attempt to block and parry the attack away. As Naomasa is about to do this, Musashi puts everything he can into this swing, aiming for Naomasa's weapon rather than Naomasa himself, completely shattering it on impact, leaving Musashi the victor. This outcome shocks everybody in attendance, and Naomasa congratulates Musashi, though suggests that were he not so resilient to Naomasa's attacks, he would have probably lost, Musashi chuckling and admitting that he's probably right. Impressed at Musashi's victory, Naomasa requests a new weapon and asks to be pitted against Sojin next, wanting to see just how true to life his reputation really is. Also sharing this curiosity, Ieyasu does not object, and Sojin agrees to spar against Naomasa, though this match barely lasts a minute, with Sojin effortlessly disarming General despite the latter's skill. Everyone, especially Ieyasu, are floored at the massive gap in strength between them, and he begins to reconsider his more neutral stance if Sojin is truly this strong. Sojin helps Naomasa to his feet and the latter bows, thanking Sojin for the match, a clear respect having been developed for the Black Oni. Ieyasu asks the group just how many allies they've gained so far, and Matsu tells him that should negotiations go well, the others will have recruited their 10th ally, noting that Musashi is the only member of the group who cannot outright kill Genma. Ieyasu can't help but be rather impressed by this, but still isn't confident enough in their odds to commit to a full alliance just yet, mentioning that while they have a good number of warriors capable of killing Genma, he wants a way to train his own army to combat them without Hideyoshi's notice. The group agree to see if they can find a way to make it happen and promise to update soon, though Ieyasu again expresses frustration at Hanzo's disappearance, wanting him to do a bit of scouting in the meantime. While still not revealing the whole truth, Sojin is a little more blunt in his response, expressing that he never trusted Hanzo to begin with and believing him to be someone who would go behind anyone's back for the sake of personal gain. Ieyasu frowns a little upon hearing this, mentioning that Sojin has always been a bit too untrusting for his own good, but as Sojin is about to respond, he notices Hidetada peeking out from behind a door, giving him a bit of a death stare as he says, "For certain people at least." This is full confirmation for Hidetada that Sojin at least labels him as the main suspect behind the assassination, if not outright knows that he is responsible and is quick to hide in fear, certain now that Sojin is plotting his revenge. Ieyasu doesn't quite notice this tiny interaction and thanks the Oni for their time, requesting an update soon. In reality, Sojin isn't actually planning to retaliate against Hidetada, instead deciding to keep him too scared to act. Though this is more out of amusement considering that with Hanzo dead and Juju and Ginfa gone, there's nothing he can even do anymore to begin with. They return to Mount Hiei and meet Roberto, who is still unwilling to speak to them, though is a tiny bit more responsive to Ohatsu outside of conversing in Spanish with Tenkai. With such a large team and his new power unlocked, Sojin decides that it's time to take action and confront Hideyoshi directly in Kyoto, Roberto silently agreeing since he's likely to find Luis there as well. Akane is still dead set on finding Munenori, and Musashi simply wants action against the Genma in general, and while Tenkai is a little uncertain, he hopes that a 10-person team will be enough and agrees, telling of the Genma mother tree that must be purified in order to destroy the rest. The group head out and meet at the Akechi tomb in order to split up their assault and meet at the temple gates, with Musashi sticking with Matsukaze since he is still incapable of killing Genma. Like canon, upon entering the temple grounds, Jubei and Roberto rush at Munenori and Luis, though Ohatsu tries to catch up to Roberto and reel him in. Unfortunately, she ends up losing them as Luis leads Roberto away from the party. Musashi tries to back up Jubei, who again snaps at him at first, but begrudgingly backtracks when he reminds her that she can't beat him on her own. While Ohatsu tries and fails to track down Roberto, Claudius is able to goad Sojin into rushing towards Hideyoshi himself, though this time is followed by Heihachi and Ohatsu, the latter having heard the commotion and rushing to back Sojin up. Otsune decides it best to try and track down Roberto, leaving Tenkai, Matsukaze and Okuni to be confronted by Sakon, though Claudius is forced to fight as well, considering Sakon would be woefully outmatched against all three of them alone. Despite the aid, Sakon is soon defeated by the group, leaving all of them to turn their attention towards Claudius and push him back, forcing him to flee. With their battle over, Matsu turns to see Munenori overwhelming his two young opponents, though this time is forced to utilise his Demon Eye to ensure that he dominates them, and the Oni intercept to push Munenori back. Matsu is soon followed by Tenkai and Okuni, which is more than enough for Munenori to realise that he is out of his depth and flees, this time before he is able to injure Jubei Musashi, the former growing more frustrated at her uncle's escape. Now free to act, the five of them rush to aid Sojin against Hideyoshi. Heihachi and Ohatsu catch up to Sojin before he reaches Hideyoshi and try to talk him out of it, but Sojin is confident that his new Onimusha power will be enough to overcome the Warlord, and he presses on, the two joining him in the hopes of at least tackling Hideyoshi as a team rather than alone. Upon reaching Hideyoshi, the Warlord only really acknowledges Sojin, with the latter suddenly kneeling before him with Heihachi following suit, trusting that Sojin has a plan. Ohatsu instead calls out to her sister, but Ophelia only laughs, demanding that she bow before Hideyoshi as well, and while Ohatsu is upset, she notices the look in Heihachi's eye and decides to follow their lead. This confrontation plays out more or less the same until Sojin drops the act and draws Requiem to challenge Hideyoshi, the other two standing ready to back him up. Hideyoshi summons Genma generals, but Heihachi and Ohatsu are able to dispatch them as Soki transforms into his purified Black Onimusha form, causing Hideyoshi to realise that he needs to face Sojin himself. While he initially tries toying with Sojin like in canon, Sojin's already unlocked power forces Hideyoshi to quickly tap into his full power from the get-go. Yet even this isn't enough to completely tip the scales, and the fight is actually rather even, with Sojin actually landing a few decent blows in the early moments of the fight. However, as the fight drags on, Sojin slowly begins to flag and the fight starts to shift in Hideyoshi's favour, his power remaining constant while Sojin is starting to have trouble maintaining his new power. Heihachi initially attempts to join the fight, but Ophelia suddenly blocks him off. Ohatsu asks why she's stopping them, and Ophelia simply tells them that nobody defies Hideyoshi, using her magic to bind them. The other five soon arrive, causing Ophelia to drop her magic in a bit of fear upon seeing Tenkai, only to shift and chuckle that it doesn't matter that they're here since Hideyoshi will not let them hurt her. They arrive in time to see Sojin losing ground against Hideyoshi, and he is eventually defeated as he becomes too tired and injured to maintain his Onimusha form anymore, dropping out of it as Hideyoshi sends him flying back. Everyone is baffled that Hideyoshi's power never seemed to falter despite Sojin's Onimusha strength, and upon Sojin's defiance to join him, Hideyoshi prepares his godly power to kill them all, Yodo suddenly taking the chance to bind them before Tenkai is able to react in time to stop her. While he struggles to use his own power, her spell is suddenly broken by an arriving Otsune, forcing Yodo to back off, though the latter is unconcerned as Hideyoshi is already about to launch his attack. Tenkai blocks it like usual and tells the party to return to Mount Hiei and discover the source of Hideyoshi's seemingly infinite power. Otsune attempts to stand with Tenkai and help him push the attack back, but Tenkai, knowing that it will do them no good, tells her to flee with the others despite her increasingly desperate protests. Eventually, Otsune is grabbed by Matsukaze and they flee with her to Enryaku Temple as Tenkai is seemingly swallowed in the blast. They report Tenkai's final act to Arin, and both she and Matsu focus on consoling Otsune, the latter heavily grieving the monk's passing, though she and Matsu hold out a tiny bit of hope that Tenkai may have somehow survived. Once the party are able to continue moving forward from mourning Tenkai, they begin to discuss their next move, agreeing that Hideyoshi could never have that much power on his own, deciding that there must be something actively supplying him with it. Given that Jubei is already present, Stage 9 is completely skipped, so Otsune ends up suggesting that they try to track down Roberto first, mentioning that she lost their trail in Kyoto and suspecting Luis to be responsible. They ask Minokichi to try and track him, and the young Mino eventually receives word from his contacts about the San España, telling of a Westerner who was recently taken there. While they're discussing this, Jubei is found sitting away from the group like in canon, though this time is approached by Okuni rather than Arin. By this point, the two have developed a similar friendship to the one shown in Night of Genesis, and Okuni is quick to see that Jubei is a little jealous of the relationship between Sojin and Ohatsu. Okuni can't help but tease her a little bit for her crush on Sojin, chuckling at the idea of young love and jokingly suggesting Musashi instead, to which Jubei adamantly refuses, almost disgusted at the idea. Okuni only laughs further and admits that she can be a bit of a matchmaker at times, but then quickly becomes a bit more serious in demeanour. She tells Jubei that while her feelings are valid, she must come to terms that Sojin and Ohatsu are already bonded, and that trying to pursue him herself would be painfully cruel. Jubei takes in what Okuni says and promises to try and move on from these feelings, saying that she sees Sojin as more of an older brother anyway, something that gets another chuckle out of Okuni. Sojin approaches them and tells them to get ready to find Roberto, and Okuni can't help but further tease Jubei much like Arin does. On the way towards the San España, Otsune can't help but express concern at Luis's likely involvement, suspecting some sort of trap or scheme from him, and decides to go ahead and infiltrate the hospital on her own just in case. The rest of the party get in as normal and soon confront him, witnessing his experiments on Roberto and preparing to fight. The room is actually a bit bigger here than we see in canon, with other tables spread around them, two in particular catching their attention. One table is much larger than the rest, with a large beast strapped to it, and another situated close by with what appears to be a young girl. The party soon realising that Juju and Ginfa have also been subject to these horrific experiments. As the party begin to battle Rosencrantz, Ginfa, who has not been experimented on quite as much as Juju or Roberto, begins to wake up from the noise, quickly seeing Juju nearby, but is too weak to break his restraints and reach her. As he continues to struggle, he sees for a split second a figure break Juju's restraints and disappear with her, growling at the sight but still unable to pursue. Suddenly, mid-fight, a glowing kunai comes flying down and lands right at Rosencrantz's feet, detonating with powerful magic and temporarily locking him in place. Otsune rushing in and landing a significant blow on the scientist before joining the rest of the Oni in the fight. Obviously, a party of 8 is far beyond Rosencrantz's capabilities and he is defeated, though while his trap springs, causing Genma to spawn, they are simply not enough to be a threat and the Oni are able to dispatch them as Luis is able to break Rosencrantz's possession to beg them to save Roberto. As Sojin grabs him, Otsune tells the party to grab Ginfa as well, and the beast is hauled out by Matsu, Heihachi, and Musashi. Otsune leads them to a safe spot where they find an unconscious and heavily injured Juju, and while they initially consider bringing them back to Mount Hiei, Otsune and Matsu are quick to remind the party of the Oni barrier that would disallow them entry. Instead, Otsune decides to telepathically contact Arin in a similar fashion to Tenkai in the manga and ask her to bring food and medicine to try and treat Juju and Ginfa here. Arin is quick to arrive and they first tend to Juju, seeing that she is in a much worse state than Ginfa, the latter clearly on edge as they are checking her wounds, but still too weak to do anything. While he initially growls whenever they touch her, he realises that they are actively trying to help her and calms down a little, the party soon tending to his own wounds once they're finished with hers. Soon, Ginfa is treated enough to be able to stand and move on his own, and Arin gives him a basket of food for both himself and Juju once she wakes, telling him that they've done what they can and that she needs food and rest to recover properly. Understanding this, Ginfa eats enough to recover some energy, and once Juju is lifted onto his back, he rushes off with the rest. With only Roberto left to treat, they quickly patch up what they can to make the journey back to Enryaku a bit less damaging for him, and he is given proper care once they return, eventually waking up 10 days later and thanking the party for their aid, now speaking to them in Japanese. With Roberto now recovering, Arin is asked to send an update to Ieyasu, the latter learning of Roberto's rescue and Tenkai's death in Kyoto, now becoming a little more apprehensive to ally with them after their defeat in Daigo. After 2 months, Roberto fully recovers and decides to head to Sawayama to retrieve his pendant, and Sojin, Jubei, Ohatsu and Okuni decide to go with him. Otsune instead decides to go out and scout for more information, hoping to find a clue to discovering Hideyoshi's power source, while Matsukaze and Heihachi ask Musashi to stay at Enryaku in order to continue his training. While Stage 11 remains the same, Musashi's training is focused on refining his technique, while Heihachi and Matsu attempt to further teach him to be more empathetic, though Musashi is now a bit more receptive after having twice prevented Munenori from killing Jubei. The group soon return having found Roberto's keepsake, and Jubei can't help but jokingly ask if Musashi actually learned anything, but Musashi actually keeps a cooler head this time and confirms that he has. Surprised at his lack of a reaction, Jubei asks him to prove it in a one-on-one match, reminding him that their last match ended in a draw, and Musashi accepts, everyone else staying to spectate. Knowing his history of power over speed, Jubei immediately starts by trying to outspeed him, but he's actually able to keep up and parry her attacks, retaliating with more precision than before. Jubei can't help but be inwardly impressed by his improvements and decides to kick things up a notch, putting more power into her strikes to challenge his resilience. This pushes Musashi into the defensive, and he is soon forced to up his own game, responding with heavier blows to throw Jubei off. With his more refined ability, this adaptability almost threatens to outpace Jubei, being able to keep up with his speed but not resist his raw strength, and she is forced to tap into the power of her demon eye, causing her to completely shift the scales and overwhelming Musashi, leaving her the victor now that she is able to control it. While able to accept losing this time, Musashi remains frustrated that he still doesn't have a similar power, though now more focused on wanting to help the group against the Genma rather than simply power for power's sake. Mirroring their first duel, Jubei extends her hand to him, calling it a good match and flat out admitting that were it not for her own Oni power, he could have defeated her, Musashi thanking her as she helps him from the floor. As he's about to let go, she attempts again to land her bladeless skim technique on him, but Musashi is actually able to react this time, grabbing her foot just before she makes contact. Seeing that he managed to block it this time, Jubei laughs and admits that perhaps he really is learning something, remembering not to let his guard down so easily this time. Musashi jokes that even now, Jubei can't help but get the last word in, and the two share a laugh before rejoining the rest of the group, everyone impressed at Musashi's progress. Matsu and Heihachi are particularly proud of him, the former saying that Musashi could well be deemed worthy by the Oni very soon. Jubei tells Matsu not to praise him too much, though inwardly agrees, now having finally built a genuine respect for Musashi by now, while Musashi promises to prove her wrong. A few days later, Matsu approaches Arin and asks her about directly contacting the Oni clan in order to judge Musashi, and the two venture down the mountain at night to speak to the Oni god. While they're out, Arin notes Matsu's mood lately, seeing that he's clearly enjoying training Musashi, and he responds that he saw a free spirit within Musashi and couldn't help but identify with him. He just needed to be pushed in the right direction in order for him to build character as well as skill. Arin is quick to agree, but her mood drops a bit, as after hesitating a little, she asks him why he reacted the way he did when Sojin mentioned encountering Laertes within the Oni gate. Matsu's face drops a bit as well, admitting that he is still quite bothered about it. Arin asks him if it's because Tenkai and Otsune failed to save him, but Matsu is quick to say no, knowing full well that it was by no means their fault. He instead attributes it more to shame, disgusted at himself for turning his blade against the ones he swore to fight for, even if it was due to Guildenstern's conversion, the thought of which he also admits still heavily disturbs him. After a moment of silence, Arin speaks up, assuring him that what happened wasn't his fault either, and reminding him that his actions prevented Tenkai's conversion as well, a fact that Matsu admits makes the shame a little easier to cope with. She says that his actions as an Oni for 20 plus years far outweigh his actions as a brainwashed slave of the Genma, and that she and the others have complete trust in him, reminding him of the shame that Tenkai and Otsune felt for failing to save him. After a moment of silence, Matsu lets out a chuckle and apologises, saying that it isn't like him to mope like that, before giving her a more serious look and thanking her for her support. Half joking, Arin suggests that maybe Matsu could stick around here a little more if he needs to, and Matsu laughs, saying that she knows he was never good at sitting still for long, though agrees that maybe they can work something out in the future. Following this conversation, the two come into contact with the Oni god and ask him to judge whether or not Musashi is worthy, and the god acknowledges Musashi's growth, though he still has a ways to go. Still, the Oni god has faith since Musashi is clearly learning from the right people and agrees that he has earned the power he seeks, disappearing upon passing his judgment. As they return to the temple that night, Musashi is visited by an Oni spirit while he sleeps, granting him Oni power and telling him to use it for the greater good. The next morning, Musashi awakens to find an Oni gauntlet on his right arm, realizing that he has finally achieved his dream and become an Onimusha, understanding that his character growth is what finally made him worthy. While ecstatic that his dreams have finally been realized, he swears that he won't forget what he's learnt over the past few months and vows to aid the party against the Genma. The party congratulate him, including Jubei, but Otsune quickly notices a familiar glow coming from his new gauntlet, taking a closer look to find that Musashi had also been granted a familiar yellow orb. Realizing she's right, he discovers that he has been granted a familiar set of dual swords to match his fighting style. Musashi is now wielding Tenso. Otsune, familiar with these swords, tells him that they were once wielded by the Red Onimusha when he battled Nobunaga, and asks him to treat them with care and respect, Musashi swearing to do so. The party soon begin to discuss their next move, wanting to find a way to weaken Hideyoshi, and Roberto suggests the Toyokuni research facility in Sakai, telling them that his pendant is actually a key to enter the building. They agree that this is their best move and head inside, soon reaching the main control room and allowing Roberto to discover the Genma's ultimate plan, promising to tell them once they return to Enryaku. They destroy the generators and reach the basement to find the Dark Stone, and Musashi, now emboldened by his new power, attempts to slash at it, only to be sent flying back as it resists his blow. As he is helped to his feet, Claudius appears and realizes that Roberto had led them here, watching as Roberto reveals his ability to destroy the stones and begins punching it. Claudius tries to kill him, but Sojin blocks the attack, and Claudius becomes extremely concerned at the idea of a 9-on-1 battle, knowing that such a fight would be suicide for him. Already a little desperate given the odds, he tries to use his magic to bind the party, but despite being close enough to the stone to fuel his power, the stone, at this point, is about half full as opposed to almost used up like in canon, and he is simply incapable of binding all 10 of his foes. He tries to focus on the heavy hitters like Sojin, Roberto, Matsu, Otsune and Heihachi, but in the end it simply doesn't matter, as Ohatsu takes a quick pot shot at him while the likes of Okuni, Jubei and Musashi cut everyone free. And the party end up completely brutalizing Claudius, while Roberto resumes punching the Dark Stone, destroying it as Claudius is defeated. Claudius is a bit more annoyed this time since the stone still had a fair bit of dark essence to send to Hideyoshi, but tries to keep his cool, assuring that his long-term plan remains unaffected. Sojin calls out his identity as Claudius and demands to know the full extent of their plan, but Claudius, now seeing just how much of a threat the Oni have become, simply tells them that it doesn't matter and flees. In reality, as these events are occurring about 5 to 6 months earlier than in canon, Claudius has come to realise that there is more than enough time for them to actually stop his plan, and decides not to tell them anything as opposed to revealing everything like he does in canon. In the end, however, it makes no difference as Roberto tells the party everything once they return to Mount Hiei, revealing the existence of the Triumvirate as well as their plan to manipulate Hideyoshi into reviving the Genma God of Light, acting simply as a physical vessel rather than turning him into a god instead. With this massive revelation, Matsu asks Arin to relay this information to Ieyasu, and Arin delivers another letter informing him as such, as well as Musashi's new power and the first Darkstone's destruction. Now hopeful following this massive victory, he leaves a reply asking how long they have until the Omen Star descends, as well as how they can set up training for his forces to combat the Genma alongside the Oni. Arin receives and relays this reply, and Minokichi chimes in to tell them that as a member of the Mino clan, he can easily send people into the Dark Realm, explaining its original purpose as a training ground during the Onin War. He suggests sending Ieyasu's men in groups alongside one Genma killer to help them learn how to fight them. As for the Omen Star, Roberto is able to give a rough estimate that it should complete its descent in about 5 to 6 months, giving them more than enough time to reach the Darkstone, destroy it, and return with time to spare. The party decide to head towards Sakai in order to commandeer the San Felipe and speed up the journey, deciding that despite the time they have, it's best not to take any chances in case they're wrong. As they're leaving, Arin can't help but give a bit of a concerned look at Matsu considering their recent conversation, but Matsu tells her not to worry, saying that he has no plans on dying yet and promises to make it back soon. Okuni can't help but tease him a little as they leave, playfully suggesting that there's something between the two, but Matsu denies it, saying that they've been a team for a long time, so of course she's going to worry. Once they leave, Arin prepares to send further word to Ieyasu, but is interrupted by the sound of Tenkai escaping the Oni gate, delighted to see that he's alive and giving him the rundown of events. Once he's caught up, he leaves to catch up with the rest of the party while Arin delivers her letter to Ieyasu. Upon reading Arin's letter, he is rather optimistic about the prospect of using the Dark Realm, but decides to wait until he receives word of the second Darkstone's destruction before solidifying their alliance. Hearing of this, Hidetada begins to panic, thinking that once the party return from Shimabara, his father will learn the truth of his assassination attempt and have him executed. Desperate, he decides to contact the false Tenkai to try and work out a solution, but with Hanzo dead and Juju and Ginfa effectively going rogue, he is unsure what can be done, only going so far as to suggest trying to rein Juju back in. Hidetada is highly unsatisfied with this answer and believes that there may well be no way out for him now, simply praying that his brother will show him some level of mercy when the time comes. The party soon find the San Felipe in Sakai, only to be confronted by Sakon, with both Sojin and Heihachi electing to stay behind to fight him off, while the others prepare the ship. Being outnumbered 2-1, especially with one of his opponents being Sojin, Sakon is at a significant disadvantage, but as he attempts to take a heavy swing towards the two, his attack is suddenly deflected as chained blades fly towards them from the nearby rooftops, forcing both Sakon and his Oni opponents to jump back. With the others having noticed this one by one, they all look towards the source, only to witness Juju and Ginfa staring down at them. Otsune and Okuni recognize her and leave the boat to approach, causing Sakon to take a swing at them as he notices their presence. Juju, recognizing them as the ones who saved her, especially Otsune, reacts and attacks Sakon as the Oni dodge him. With Juju and Ginfa now aiding the fight, Sakon is completely dogpiled and defeated, and the Oni soon rush to reach the ship before it leaves. Otsune and Okuni look back and encourage Juju and Ginfa to come with them, and after a moment of hesitation, she mounts Ginfa as they leap onto the deck, the rest of the party now a little tense at her presence. Instead of initiating further hostilities, Juju dismounts Ginfa and turns to Otsune, slowly mumbling a thank you to her, knowing that it was her that saved her life. Otsune can't help but smile, telling her it was no problem, But the boat is suddenly rocked as Sakon manages to climb on and attempt to destroy it, only to be stopped by Tenkai as he deflects Sakon's attack. While Okuni can't help but say she isn't too surprised that he was able to survive, Otsune is almost in tears at the sight of him, only for her to snap out of it as Sakon prepares again to destroy the ship. Of course, Tenkai and Sojin are able to defeat and purify him, shattering Ophelia's mask and sending him overboard, leaving the party to celebrate Tenkai's safe return as the ship sets sail towards Kyushu. Claudius and Rosencrantz notice from port and are significantly more worried, not only about just how many are now among the group of Oni, but also with how much time they need before the Omen Star descends. Recognizing just how dire their situation is, they decide to meet with Ophelia at Hizen in order to mount a combined attack once the Oni arrive. On the ship, Sojin is contacted by Fortinbras like normal, but contact is soon broken by Tenkai and Otsune, though Sojin mentions that this is actually the first time he has spoken with this strange man in white. Again, these events are happening months before they normally would, so it's around here that Sojin would receive his first visit from Fortinbras rather than in Suruga months prior. While not outright hostile, Juju and Ginfa keep their distance from the rest of the group, still not really comfortable with any of them just yet. Most of the others sharing this sentiment and just making the effort not to antagonize the two. Every now and then, Okuni actually approaches them, offering some food and attempting to make them more comfortable with the group's presence by sitting with them while they eat. While Okuni does try to make conversation, Juju doesn't really respond, still clearly not comfortable being around people right now. But while she never really speaks, she does eventually begin to at least make small physical responses to show that she is still listening, like a small nod. Though not quite trusting them yet, she does notice that, unlike her previous encounters with humans, Okuni's words seem to carry no malicious intent, instead feeling almost warm in nature. As Okuni is about to leave, having finished eating, Juju at least mumbles a thank you, clearly grateful for the food, Okuni simply smiling in response. As they further sail towards Kyushu, Okuni decides to pass the time by practicing her dancing, paying attention to the swaying of the vessel and using it to give her routine a comparable flow. The others are quick to take notice and watch, impressed at her ability, but they soon notice one by one that Okuni's dance has managed to catch even Juju's attention. While she doesn't understand what Okuni is doing, Juju can't help but find herself completely fixated on her movements, becoming almost entranced by it. Okuni notices and, with a smile, decides to begin incorporating more complicated movements, further fascinating the hybrid as she watches on. Okuni soon finishes her routine with a quick applause from the group, Tenkai saying that the last few months of fighting certainly haven't caused her to lose her touch, and Okuni smiles, quietly quipping that she's happy to have finally managed to captivate a Genma for the first time. Later that night, Roberto finds Juju and Ginfa looking out to sea while the others are all heading to sleep, and asks her if she needs anything. Juju still doesn't really speak, and Roberto, having been told of what she endured from Hanzo, empathizes with her abuse and apologizes for what she endured. He begins to tell her of his own childhood, speaking of the anti-Semitism he and his mother received when he was a child, leading to his initial distrust of Japanese individuals, followed by the death of his mother when his village was attacked by Hideyoshi. He then tells of the possession of his adopted father, Luis, and the gruesome experiments performed on himself and his 26 friends, leaving him as the only survivor. He admits that despite all of this, he has learnt to trust the rest of the group, understanding that these are good people. Juju still doesn't respond, and Roberto tells her that he will likely never know the extent to which she has suffered, but promises that whatever has happened will not repeat, assuring her that she is safe with them. Having said his piece, he decides to get some rest and advises her to do the same. While Juju never really responds to anything Roberto said, she begins to ponder his words, wondering whether or not what he says could really be true. She doesn't show it, but Roberto's bearing of his soul deeply affected her outlook. The group soon arrive at Beppu Bay in Kyushu and reach the abandoned village, soon coming face to face with Ophelia at the top of the hill. She still makes an attempt to manipulate Ohatsu, but Otsune and Okuni are able to snap her out of it long enough to see that this is clearly an imposter, and Ohatsu becomes enraged, preparing to rain hell upon Ophelia when Claudius and Rosencrantz appear to back her up, forcing Ohatsu to stop her attack. Knowing that the jig is up, Ophelia sheds her disguise as Claudius says that while they've come far, they cannot be allowed to go any further, preparing a united attack on the Oni. Roberto is obviously angry at the presence of Rosencrantz, something that Juju notices, and the two groups begin a large battle, the Oni splitting into teams to handle each member of the Triumvirate. Ohatsu has her sights set squarely on Ophelia, with Jubei, Okuni and Otsune backing her up in order to keep up with the priestess's speed. Sojin, Tenkai and Heihachi focus on Claudius, and Roberto is backed up against Rosencrantz by Musashi and Matsukaze. Juju and Ginfa, however, simply stand back, unsure what they should do. Juju is grateful for her rescue, but still remains unsure whether she trusts them enough to help them against the Triumvirate. Throughout the battle, Claudius and Ophelia continue spreading dark essence, which the latter uses in order to spawn Three Eyes in an attempt to even the playing field, and while they aren't enough to pose a genuine threat, they do succeed in further dividing the Oni's attention, giving the Triumvirate occasional moments to breathe. Juju's gaze suddenly fixes on Roberto, noticing the hatred in his eyes as he continues swinging at Rosencrantz, to whom Juju suddenly pays more attention to, noticing the depraved glee he takes in Roberto's suffering. Watching this back and forth between them leaves her remembering her own trauma, especially as a slave to Hanzo who would constantly threaten and belittle her. As she realises how similar the two really are, Juju catches a glimpse of a Three Eyes lunging towards the Westerner, and she finally snaps. As Roberto turns to defend himself from the Three Eyes, it is suddenly run through by a chained blade, and everyone notices, turning to see Juju glaring at the Triumvirate before she fires even more, and skewering the rest of the Three Eyes before anyone can react. Ophelia attempts to retaliate against her, but she is forced back by Ohatsu's gunfire, and Juju sends Ginfa to attack, leaping at Ophelia before she can dodge and biting down on her with his massive jaws. He soon throws her towards the Oni, who are very quick to capitalise, and Ophelia is completely brutalised as they relentlessly beat her down. Having lost all momentum, the rest of the Triumvirate are quick to fall as well, and the three of them are left barely conscious by the end, using what little strength they have left to flee the moment they get even a second to breathe. While the party, especially Roberto, are incredibly frustrated that they managed to escape yet again, they are emboldened to know that even as a team, the Triumvirate is just too weak to stop them now. With the fight now over, Otsune approaches Juju and thanks her for her aid, extending her hand. Juju initially recoils as she does, but takes a moment to notice how warm Otsune's smile really is, and realise that she doesn't feel that threatened anymore, slowly extending her own hand to meet Otsune's. Otsune softly grips Juju's hand, shaking it and repeating her thanks before letting go, Roberto also expressing thanks for helping them as the others follow suit. Seeing that Juju may well truly be their ally now, Musashi jokes that their family just got a bit bigger, causing Jubei to snap that they aren't a family as the rest of the group just laugh. Tenkai tells them that it's time to make their way to Shimabara and destroy the Dark Stone, and as the group leave, Matsukaze turns back to Juju, noticing that she's still a little stunned at her lack of fear and asks her to come with them. Seeing that she's been accepted, she mounts Ginfa and they join the Oni, Juju unable to help but crack a bit of a smile to herself. The party eventually arrive in Shimabara and make camp, preparing to assault the facility the next day, with Roberto and Ohatsu having the same conversation as Canon. Soon after Ohatsu leaves to get some rest, Roberto takes another moment looking out to sea before hearing footsteps behind him. He turns around, thinking that Ohatsu had something else to say, but instead finds Juju approaching him, asking if she needs something. After a bit of hesitation, she walks forward and stands alongside Roberto overlooking the sea, and quietly begins to ask him why he was subject to the abuse he suffered over the years. Surprised at not only hearing her willingly speak, but to ask of something of that nature, Roberto answers that the people who victimized himself and his mother did so through ignorance, while Rosencrantz's torture was out of pure cruelty. While he now sees that those who hounded him and his mother were not representative of all Japanese people, Rosencrantz is the perfect example of Genma cruelty to Roberto, telling of the scientist's love for the atrocities he causes. He performs his experiments either to learn more of human anatomy, to convert them into monsters, or in rare cases, discover the source of powers he doesn't understand, citing the exercising beads within himself as a clear example. He takes solace, however, in knowing that while he initially thought Luis had betrayed him, he was never really responsible, though acknowledges that Luis is likely riddled with so much guilt that he wants Roberto to kill him in order to atone. Roberto then turns to Juju and asks why she wanted to know, and Juju slowly begins to tell of her abusive past, telling of the humans that subjected her to extreme physical abuse before eventually being found and imprisoned by a monk. She then tells of her time under Hanzo's command, describing the verbal and physical abuse she received from him whenever he was angry, while under constant threat of punishment from said monk if she or Ginfa ever retaliated. She assumed that humans treated her like this because she wasn't one, but Roberto apologizes, promising that it will never happen again. Juju notes that Roberto intends to make things right by killing Luis and Rosencrantz, but she is unable to do the same since Hanzo is already dead, so she asks if revenge is the only way forward, but Roberto tells her that it isn't entirely about revenge. He says that while revenge was always part of it, he is also aiming for Rosencrantz's death in order to spare others the fate that the scientist subjected him to, breaking the cycle of cruelty that the scientist perpetuated. Juju appears to ponder this for a while, and Roberto soon suggests that they get some rest now, Juju agreeing and heading back to camp. The party assault the Shimabara facility the next day, destroying the generators and reaching the basement to find the second Dark Stone. This time, while they find the stone floating above them, none of the Triumvirate appear to face them, and the Oni are eventually able to raise the platform to reach and destroy it, escaping the facility with no incident. While they are happy that Hideyoshi's power supply has been cut off, they can't help but feel a bit worried at just how easy this was, wondering why the Dark Stone was practically left undefended. Regardless, with their mission complete, they begin the journey back to Mount Hiei, heading back to Beppu Bay and taking the San Felipe on a return trip to Sakai, not needing to rush to the transport device in Nagoya Castle since they still have around 5 months before the star falls. They reach Sakai and are about to head back to Enryaku, but Tenkai stops the party and reminds them of the Oni barrier, meaning Juju and Ginfa would be unable to enter. Unsure exactly what to do, they make camp outside Sakai and eventually decide that this may be a good time to meet with Ieyasu and try to secure an alliance. Tenkai decides to telepathically contact Arin to update her and ask her to send a letter to Ieyasu, updating him on the situation and informing him that they are heading his way. While Ieyasu is hopeful that both the Dark Stones are destroyed, he is a little concerned at the knowledge of Juju and Ginfa, worried about associating with anything Genma due to his own views on those that use them, not wanting to follow the same path as Nobunaga or Hideyoshi. He decides to at least meet the two and decide for himself, noting their assurance that the two are not hostile. While the party prepare to leave for the Jurakudai Palace, Juju is extremely apprehensive, not wanting to go back there again. When they ask her what's wrong, Juju finally decides to tell them that the monk she was enslaved by kept her captive beneath the palace, revealing that it was Hidetada Tokugawa who contacted him alongside Hanzo to assassinate the party. While Heihachi is happy to have confirmation that Ieyasu is truly not responsible for attacking them, the party are quick to assure her that they won't let Hidetada or the monk near her, though agree not to force her to go if she really doesn't want to. Juju raises her head and looks at them for a moment, soon asking them to promise that they will keep the monk away from her, and they are quick to agree, saying that she can fight back if he tries anything and they'll make sure she faces no repercussions. Now having built a trust in the party, this is enough to convince Juju to go with them, and they soon arrive at the Jurakudai Palace, the guards becoming alarmed at the sight of her and Ginfa. Ieyasu is notified of their arrival and he says that they are all expected, including Juju and Ginfa, the guards nervously standing aside as the group meet with Ieyasu. Both Hidetada and the monk are with him as they enter, and while Hidetada is clearly trying to hide his fear, the monk zeroes his focus on Juju, surprised that she has returned. She glares back at him, never taking her eyes off of him in case something happens, and some of the party notice, realising that this is the monk Juju mentioned and staying close to her. The monk, however, seeing Juju giving him the biggest death stare, quickly realises just how much she hates him, so he decides it best not to make any moves. Introductions are made with those Ieyasu hasn't met, with him expressing surprise at Ohatsu opposing Hideyoshi despite her sister's position as Hideyoshi's royal concubine, but Ohatsu says that she refuses to serve a monster like him, telling that the Cha-Cha standing by him now is a Genma imposter. When learning of Tenkai's name, the monk suddenly locks up in fear, realising that the man whose identity that he has been using is suddenly standing right in front of him, while Ieyasu looks at the nervous monk and calls it an interesting coincidence. He then asks if the Dark Stones have really been destroyed, and the party confirms. Ieyasu then asks if anybody else is possessed by Genma like Mitsunari or Luis Frois, but they are fairly certain that no one outside of the Triumvirate have possessed anyone. He moves the topic to the Dark Realm, asking how they can use it for training, and as the party are about to explain, Minokichi drops in, startling Ieyasu. After introducing himself, he explains that he is capable of sending people there whenever they're ready, suggesting that one of the Oni are present with any human forces to ensure that the Genma they train against can be killed. Ieyasu agrees and tells them that it will take a few days to make the preparations with his forces, allowing them to stay within the palace in the meantime. Throughout their stay, the party makes sure that at least one of them remains with Juju and Ginfa at all times, ensuring that the monk is under constant watch and never attempts to approach. Sojun takes the time to meet with his siblings, with his interaction with Tadayoshi being once again fairly cordial, since there's no real bad blood between them. Hidetada, however, is very visibly nervous in Sojun's presence, the latter noticing his fear and simply telling him that he needn't worry if succession is what's got him worried, since he has no plans to succeed Ieyasu. Hidetada tries his best to play it off as just being surprised to see him again, but Sojun can tell that Hidetada is still terrified about retaliation for the assassination attempt. While he's still very angry at him for it, he decides not to say anything and let him stew in his own fear, being inwardly amused as Hidetada makes clear attempts to stay on his good side by constantly capitulating to him. Sojun also meets with his sisters, again having no issues with them, and while they are rather passive, no conflict arises between them. In truth, the only one Sojun really has any major issues with is Hidetada. Heihachi and Tenkai end up speaking with Ieyasu, and while the Lord questions whether or not Heihachi has forgotten his loyalties, clearly alluding to the presence of a Genma despite knowing his thoughts regarding them, Heihachi assures that he never forgot. He and Tenkai decide that now is the time to reveal the truth, telling Ieyasu that Hanzo is gone because he was sent to assassinate them at the behest of Hidetada, likely to secure his position as first in the line of succession, before they slew Hanzo in self-defense. This revelation alone angers Ieyasu, and while he doesn't want to believe it, it not only explains Hanzo's disappearance, but also Hidetada's rising fear whenever Sojun is around. The Oni continue by explaining that Juju and Ginfa were also involved, having been imprisoned beneath the palace by the false Tenkai until they were forced to aid in Hanzo's mission, telling of the abuse she received at their hands. They assure him that the two have already aided them against the Triumvirate, and promise that as long as the monk is kept away, they will cause no problems. Realising that not one or two, but 3 separate individuals close to him conspired behind his back, Ieyasu is left furious, initially considering immediate and severe punishment for Hidetada, but suddenly changes his mind after a moment of thought. While he still plans for the monk to receive a more immediate punishment, he decides to arrange something much more long-term for Hidetada, almost cracking a bit of a smile. Ieyasu thanks the two for telling him the truth, and soon after this conversation, demands that the monk be brought before him under guard of sword. In broad daylight, and in the presence of both the Oni and the entire Tokugawa family, Ieyasu formally accuses the monk of high treason against the Tokugawa house by attempting to utilize the Genma to usurp his rule. The monk is quick to deny, but Ieyasu silences him, saying that he knows everything that he attempted to do behind his back, sentencing him to execution as punishment. As the monk is brought before Heihachi, who is assigned as his executor, he scans his surroundings until he spots Juju among the Oni, begging for her aid in a last-ditch effort to save his life. While this causes some to worry that Juju and Ginfa may be co-conspirators, Juju remains silent, only glaring at him in response, though the Oni notice that she seems to be getting a bit restless. Heihachi soon notices this too and calls Ieyasu, asking if he can pass the duty of executioner to somebody else. Ieyasu is rather confused by this request and asks who he has in mind, and Heihachi approaches Juju, asking if she wants the chance to end the cycle of abuse herself. Surprised at this, she looks between Heihachi and the monk, before shifting her gaze back at the spearman and nodding. Having been told of Juju's past with the monk, Ieyasu agrees to Heihachi's request, if only to see if he is right about whether or not she is truly their ally, and Heihachi has the monk thrown to the ground, leaving him entirely at Juju's mercy as she slowly approaches him. He tries to raise himself to his feet and make a final attempt to beg Juju for mercy, but Juju responds by impaling him with one of her blades. Now going into shock and coughing blood, Juju waits for him to raise his head and lock eyes with her again, and once he does, she finally speaks, saying only 3 words: "I am human." As soon as these words reach his ears, Juju fires another 5 chains through his stomach, completely skewering him before finally retracting them, allowing his lifeless body to fall to the ground. While she initially doesn't react, the Oni soon rush to her side as she steps back and drops to her knees, the reality that she is finally free now suddenly hitting her. Almost shedding a few tears as she begins to process her first moments of true freedom, she looks up to see her new allies trying to comfort her alongside Ginfa, and no longer finds herself recoiling as they approach. Otsune asks if she's okay, and while clearly shaken, she eventually nods, slowly beginning to smile to herself as she thanks them for setting her free. Wanting to lift the mood for everyone, especially Juju, Okuni suggests that she prepare a dance routine for everyone in the palace to lift their spirits, and everyone, including Ieyasu, expresses excitement at the idea. As she's about to walk away to prepare her routine, she promises Juju that she'll be guaranteed a front row seat, the hybrid smiling in response. Seeing this display is enough to convince Ieyasu that Juju was indeed just another victim, and as he has the monk's body removed, he turns towards Hidetada and locks eyes with him, clearly seeing that he is absolutely bricking it. But Ieyasu simply says that he is resuming his preparations for training before walking away. Absolutely certain now that Ieyasu is aware of his involvement with Hanzo and the monk, Hidetada is left baffled that he received no punishment, but as he turns back towards the Oni, he sees Sojin giving him a knowing look, which only makes him even more fearful for his future. That night, Okuni begins her performance for the palace, backed up by some Tokugawa musicians, and Juju is completely entranced by the performance, Okuni smiling at seeing it help cheer her up. While most of the Tokugawa family are also enjoying the show, Tokuhime can't help but ask her father why Hidetada isn't also present, and Ieyasu simply tells her that he had responsibilities to attend to, giving Sojin a knowing smirk. Sojin can't help but smirk back before turning his attention to the rest of the performance, expecting further punishment for Hidetada as time goes on. The next few days aren't quite as eventful, but the party take advantage of what free time they have. Heihachi and Matsu often train alongside Musashi and Jubei, with Naomasa soon joining them as they further work to refine their skills. Naturally, a great respect is built between Naomasa and the Oni during this time. Okuni continues practicing her dances, often with Juju and Ginfa watching, the former beginning to smile openly a bit more often. Sojin spends a bit of time connecting with most of his siblings, though Hidetada now takes every available opportunity to stay as far out of his way as possible out of fear, though he finds himself steadily losing more and more of his free time as Ieyasu assigns an increasing number of chores and odd jobs, leaving him both scared and frustrated over time. Ohatsu begins to build a friendship with Kamehime and Tokuhime, the two siblings noticing her clear bond with Sojin and asking if she plans to marry him. Like with Roberto, she's caught off guard and stammers a half-hearted denial, but the two laugh and actively encourage it. Unsurprisingly, Roberto would receive no shortage of stares from many of those within the palace, having never seen a Westerner before. But as they watch him sometimes join in with the others' sparring sessions, the people would slowly warm up to him over time. Tenkai and Otsune would spend a fair bit of time meditating, though would also contact Arin to inform her of their positive outcome, including Juju's freedom from her past. Arin expresses relief that she's doing better now and wishes them luck with their training. After about a week passes, Ieyasu reports that preparations are now complete, and they begin to split his forces into small groups and assigning them to a separate member of the party, though Juju still finds herself wanting to stick with one of them as well, so she and Ginfa end up joining with Okuni's group. The sons of Ieyasu also join in the training, with Tadayoshi joining with Matsu, and Hidetada being assigned to Sojin's group, another part of his punishment in order to ensure that he can't worm his way out of it in Sojin's presence. Sojin doesn't object to this, if only because he wants to keep Hidetada scared, and he often leaves Hidetada to be almost overwhelmed before saving his life, being particularly harsh with his training compared to everyone else. Naomasa also joins in the training, fighting alongside Heihachi due to their mutual respect as warriors, as well as their mutual loyalty to Ieyasu. After nearly 2 months pass, the people of Japan begin to collectively see Hideyoshi as a tyrant rather than a respected lord, and a revolt begins to spread across the country, halting labours and production on such a scale that the country threatens to come to an almost complete halt. This is in no small part spurred on by the word spread by those freed from the Genma trees by the Oni, encouraging the people to rise up and make a collective stand against Hideyoshi for committing such atrocities. Hideyoshi himself takes notice of this and becomes angry at the people's defiance, refusing to accept that they would dare attempt to deny his claim as the world's ruler. He soon begins giving orders to have these pockets of resistance stamped out, but a couple of days later, Tokugawa's forces complete their training, now having become significantly more effective against the Genma. Now about as ready as they could be, Ieyasu publicly announces that it is time for the Tokugawa clan to finally overtake the Toyotomi clan, leading a march towards Kyoto alongside the Oni. Hideyoshi is left outraged upon hearing of Ieyasu's betrayal, questioning what could have convinced him to oppose the Toyotomi now, and rescinds his initial orders to discipline the population in favour of meeting Tokugawa in battle, confident that his forces will be more than enough to end the Tokugawa family entirely. Their armies clash outside Daigo Temple, and the Tokugawa's training proves to be paying off as they are able to tackle the Genma head-on and outskill them, giving the Oni the chance to kill them. Juju and Ginfa also aid in the battle, with Juju skewering multiple Genma at a time while Ginfa simply rips through targets with his massive jaws. At this point, the main party now consists of a grand total of 12 members, including Juju and Ginfa, but not including any of Ieyasu's own forces. So it's easy to imagine that this very quickly turns from a battle into a complete one-sided massacre. The increased skill of the humans alongside the sheer numbers and strength of the Oni renders even the most dangerous Genma completely powerless. Even the likes of Tadayoshi, Naomasa, and even Ieyasu are able to crush Genma in a similar fashion to Musashi before receiving his gauntlet, and once the bulk of Hideyoshi's forces are slain, Tenkai encourages the party to push towards the temple. Ieyasu initially tries to follow with his forces, but they are instead told to secure the city while the Oni deal with Hideyoshi and the Triumvirate. The party of 12 enter the temple and soon reach Fushimi Castle, the castle itself not having been ripped from the ground yet, as the Genma Mother Tree is yet to start growing since the Omen Star is still at least around 2 months away. Outside the castle stand Hideyoshi, the Triumvirate, and Muninori, all ready to make a last stand against the Oni. As they all prepare for one final confrontation, Claudius and Rosencrantz shed their hosts and finally manifest in their true forms, revealing that they took the opportunity to redirect the final Darkstone's essence to them rather than Hideyoshi, giving them enough power to fully manifest. The Oni can't help but question why Hideyoshi isn't angered by this, but he says that he didn't need the Darkstones, revealing the Genma seed that continues to fuel him. Jubei and Musashi prepare once again to face Muninori, the latter of which having already consumed Genma insects in preparation for this fight, and Jubei no longer tries to stop Musashi from helping her. She asks her uncle why he betrayed the Oni, and he gives a similar crazed response to Kanon, raving about the power of the Genma. Roberto swears vengeance against Rosencrantz while Ohatsu sets her sights squarely on Ophelia. Hideyoshi swears that the Oni will not prevent his ascension to godhood, and Sojin promises to finish him here and now, a massive scale battle beginning between them. While the Triumvirate attempt to coordinate their attacks to overwhelm the Oni, the party's teamwork and sheer numbers works well to prevent them from losing any ground. Despite tapping into his Demon Eye alongside the Genma insects, the combined might of a now Oni Musashi and a fully powered Jubei proves too much for him to overcome, Ophelia trying to back him up but being held back by Ohatsu's gunfire alongside Okuni's swift movements. She tries to use the essence spread by the Triumvirate to spawn more lesser Genma, but Juju and Ginfa are simply too efficient in killing them before they can act, also killing any Genma spawned by Rosencrantz's meteors alongside Heihachi. Matsukaze aids Roberto against the scientist, their combined strength being far too much for Rosencrantz to even contend with as the fight goes on, while Tenkai and Otsune focus on bringing down Claudius, getting rid of what essence they can while also fighting off the Chancellor's assault. Sojin focuses his attention on Hideyoshi, the both being the most powerful of their respective teams, but without the Darkstones to fuel the Genma seed, Hideyoshi soon finds himself overwhelmed by Sojin's assault, and from there it all goes downhill for the Genma. Rosencrantz is the first to fall, being floored by the combined strength of Matsu and Roberto, the Westerner taking the opportunity to completely cave in the Genma's skull with his relentless assault. Muninori and Ophelia don't last much longer, with the teamwork of Jubei and Musashi being more than enough to beat Muninori down and giving Jubei the chance to finally slay her uncle, while Ophelia is left at the mercy of Ohatsu and Okuni, the latter standing back as Ohatsu unloads far too many gunshots for Ophelia to be able to slink away before dying. Now heavily outnumbered at this point, Claudius is soon felled once Tenkai and Otsune discover his weakness in his tail, leaving only Hideyoshi remaining as he is defeated by Sojin. With Hideyoshi being the only one still alive, he is still entirely convinced that he will be a god, but Sojin ends up ripping the seed out himself, revealing that it would only make him the vessel for the real God of Light instead of a god himself. He tells of the Genma's true plan as discovered within the Sakai facility, and Hideyoshi is completely blindsided, realizing that he was just being used as a pawn by the Genma. Growing more and more horrified at his actions, he expresses severe regret at sacrificing Yodo to create the Genma Mother Tree, causing Ohatsu to almost fly into a rage before being held back by the others. As she tries to shoot Hideyoshi dead for killing Yodo, Tenkai and Otsune are quick to remind her that Sojin should be able to purify the tree as he has done with the others, likely resulting in her sister's survival. This is enough to calm Ohatsu down, at least enough to agree to try it first, but warns that if Cha-Cha doesn't survive, she will return to kill Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi doesn't even respond to Ohatsu's threat and is simply relieved that Yodo could be saved, telling the party that the tree is inside Fushimi Castle. They soon find the tree within, but since the Omen Star isn't close enough and nobody is left to use the Genma Seed, it doesn't awaken and attack them, so Sojin is able to use Requiem to purify it without any resistance, destroying the tree and leaving only Cha-Cha behind, who soon regains consciousness, sharing a tearful reunion with Ohatsu. Relieved to see Cha-Cha still alive, Hideyoshi thanks Sojin for stopping him, giving a similar speech to Kanon and asking him to watch over Hideyori, now lowering his head and awaiting the consequences. Sojin draws his blade, but after a moment decides to sheath it again, refusing to execute Hideyoshi and telling him that there's already been enough death, instead demanding that he relinquish his position as Lord and vow never to make another grab for power again. Hideyoshi is shocked but grateful at Sojin's mercy, agreeing to his terms, and both Tenkai and Otsune perform an incantation to destroy the Genma Seed entirely, causing the Omen Star to return to the underworld and preventing Fortinbras's revival. The party soon lead Hideyoshi out of Daigo Temple as they reunite with Ieyasu's forces, and Ieyasu is quick to announce their victory at the sight of their new prisoner. With Hideyoshi soon being stripped of his power and the Toyotomi clan dissolving as a result, Ieyasu is quick to begin his own conquest of Japan, beginning the Tokugawa shogunate after a few more years. Hideyoshi simply remains in Yodo Castle alongside his concubine, the both of them raising Hideyori, though now knowing that he will not be able to become lord when he comes of age. Tenkai, Otsune and Matsukaze all return to Mount Hiei, satisfied that the Genma have finally been defeated, with Matsu finally feeling like he has fully repaid the two for saving him all those years ago. As the Maeda clan begins supporting Ieyasu, he becomes a little more involved with them, though his loyalties remain with Tenkai, Otsune and Arin first. They soon focus on sealing the gauntlet to ensure Nobunaga never returns, but once that mission is complete, Tenkai and Otsune finally settle down together, eventually having a son that they name Mitsumaru, named after the late Mitsuhide Akechi and Matsu's original name of Yumemaru. Matsu can't help but feel a little flattered by this gesture, and finds himself sticking around more often at Mount Hiei and acting as an uncle figure to the boy, much to everyone's joy. With them both surviving the battle against Hideyoshi, Sojin and Ohatsu actually do end up marrying in the end, and while Cha-Cha initially tries to convince her sister to choose Kyogoku as was arranged, she is quick to see how happy Ohatsu is, and chooses to support Ohatsu's decision. After the wedding is decided, Roberto returns to Espana much like in canon, in order to ensure that they don't utilise the Genma either. Juju is a little saddened at his departure, but she is able to understand why he must, hoping that he will return one day. She and Ginfa actually end up staying with Okuni as the latter returns to her troupe to continue her dancing career, deciding to hire Juju and Ginfa as bodyguards for them. Of course, she continues to ensure that Juju always gets the best view of her performances as possible, and Juju becomes rather happy with her life moving forward, no longer remaining withdrawn like she used to be. Heihachi, unsurprisingly, returns to work for Ieyasu for the next 12 to 13 years, serving him faithfully until his eventual death in 1610. Jubei returns to the Yagyu village to report her success in the assassination of Munenori, bringing pride to her grandfather as well as the Yagyu clan as a whole. As for Musashi, he simply begins wandering, taking to heart the lessons of empathy that he had learnt from Matsukaze and trying to do good wherever he goes, though he takes the time to pay visits to both Enryaku Temple and the Yagyu village from time to time, not wanting to lose contact with his new friends. Not long after the Tokugawa shogunate begins, Ieyasu publicly announces his successor, shocking everyone, especially Hidetada, when Tadayoshi is the one planned to become the next leader of the Tokugawa clan. While Hidetada feels completely blindsided by this, Ieyasu reveals that he knew of Hidetada's involvement in the assassination plot against Sojin, and as a final punishment, completely removed him from the line of succession. While Hidetada is now relegated to serving Tadayoshi from now on, Ieyasu also reveals that Sojin had willingly given up his position in the line of succession, still wanting to live his own life how he chooses. For the rest of his days, Hidetada never gets the chance to gain any more power, instead remaining a servant of whoever becomes the lord after Tadayoshi until his eventual death in 1632. And with that, our story finally comes to a close. I love how much of a wholesome ending that turned out to be for everyone. I wasn't expecting while I was writing this for it to go from Keijiro's story to Masashi's story and eventually to Juju's story. But considering how many characters actually got involved here, I thought this was going to turn out more poorly written than I personally think it did. Giving Juju a full story arc that actually ended with her finally coming out of her shell was something I was so happy with, and it helped me with giving Okuni some presence as well, given that I find her to be one of the most difficult characters to work with, considering how little we see of her in canon. Having another story that had both Samanosuke and Kaede survive to the very end is something I'm always happy to do as well, and Matsu acting as an uncle to their son just feels right. Speaking of Matsukaze, you may be wondering why I chose that name for Keijiro when he, Samanosuke and Kaede changed their identities. It's history time once again, folks. Keijiro is based on the historical figure Maeda Toshimasu, though he was sometimes known as Keiji or Keijiro, and his size and strength are quite literally legendary throughout Japanese history. While his wild ways of battle are recorded in multiple conflicts, his most legendary act was during the siege of Haseido in 1600 against the Mogami and Date clans. Aiding Naoe Kanetsugu of the Yasugi clan, Keijiro was appointed the head of the rear guard when a retreat was sounded. Wielding a two-pronged spear atop his equally legendary steed, it is said that he led a group of only 8 riders to shatter the enemy's formation and secure Yasugi's retreat. This steed was known to be massive in size and untamable, until Keijiro alone succeeded, perhaps due to his own wild personality, soon giving it the name Matsukaze. Supposedly, this steed ran away never to be seen again upon his master's death. Okay, lesson done. Since Keijiro had no steed throughout this scenario, I decided instead for him to use the name to follow Tenkai and Otsune's example. This legendary steed is also what influenced my choice of Oni weapon for him. In short, I gave him a wind weapon because the name Matsukaze roughly translates to wind in the pines, so a wind weapon just felt perfect for him. As for why it's a Guandao, Blade Warriors implies that he is a warrior from China, so I thought it rather fitting for him to get a Chinese weapon. I will admit, with the party being as big as it was, I was really worried about writing compelling conflicts, since they were pretty much way too overpowered at all times to be threatened. So more individual struggles, like Jubei and Musashi being overwhelmed by Munenori, felt like a good way to go. On another note, something I didn't realise until I'd already wrote it was that Hanzo's death in this story is not actually that far from the supposed death of his historical counterpart. While there's no concrete decision as to which of his deaths is actually correct, one of the beliefs is that he was assassinated in 1597 by Kotaro Fuma, while the other theory is that he became a monk in Edo province before eventually dying of illness. Obviously, there was no Kotaro here this time, but writing for him to be defeated in 1597 was an interesting coincidence. It was nice to be able to give Ieyasu a bigger role here as well, though part of me wishes that I was able to find a different way to involve the Tokugawa house rather than using the same thing I did in my previous What If, but in the end it felt like it made the most sense, and it gave me a good opportunity to complete Juju's story arc as well. Finally, there's the elephant in the room that I'm sure everyone is a little confused on, that being the new name that Hideyasu received in the form of Sojin in place of Soki. In canon, he is given this name after his reputation for burning Genma trees, with the name Soki roughly translating to Oni of the Ash, in reference to the ashes of trees that he leaves behind. Here, he immediately purifies them rather than burning them, so he becomes known as the Oni of Purity instead. Of course, this means that Soki wouldn't work anymore, so I gave him the name Sojun instead, taking inspiration from the Japanese word of purity, which is Jundo, hence Sojun. With that, I think I've rambled enough now, so we'll end it here. Thanks again for watching everyone, and if you enjoy Onimusha content like this, then be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any more. I would very much appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourselves everyone. Danish out.